My son's father-in-law pointed a finger at my chest and laughed into the microphone. "Look at him," he sneered, his voice echoing across the golf course. A night guard trying to play hero in a rented suit. He thought my silence was submission. He thought my limp was weakness. He did not know that under my simple jacket a Medal of Honor was waiting to destroy his entire empire. He did not know that in less than 10 minutes the FBI would be dragging him across his own manicured lawn in handcuffs while I stood at attention. But before the justice, before the sirens and the shame, there was the offer that started the war. It began with a check for $50,000 and a father's heart breaking in slow motion. Before I tell you how I brought down a titan of industry with nothing but the truth, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that dignity is something that can never be bought. The piece of paper hit the mahogany table with a soft slap, but to me, it sounded like a gunshot. It was a check. The number 50,000 was written in sharp, aggressive blue ink. I did not look at the money. I looked at the hand that had thrown it. It was a hand with perfectly trimmed nails, a gold ring on the pinky finger, and skin that had never known a day of hard labor. I followed the arm up to the face of Conrad Montgomery. He was smiling, but it was not a smile of kindness. It was the smile a predator gives when it thinks the prey is already caught in the trap. We were sitting in the private dining room of the country club where my son Tyson was set to marry Conrad's daughter the next day. The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed, but it did not cool the heat rising in my neck. Conrad leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of scotch that cost more than my monthly pension. "Take it, Calvin," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Consider it a severance package from your duties as a father." I sat perfectly still. My left leg, the one with the shrapnel scars from 1975, throbbed under the table. It always throbbed when I sensed a threat. I kept my hands folded on my lap. I am 70 years old. I have been a Marine Sergeant Major. I have looked into the eyes of men who wanted to kill me, and I never blinked. I was not going to blink at a real estate developer in a silk tie. "What is this for, Conrad?" I asked. My voice was low. I did not need to shout to be heard. Conrad chuckled. He looked around the table at his lawyers and associates, inviting them to share in the joke. "It is a travel fund," he said. "A very generous one. Vanessa and I have been discussing the aesthetics of the wedding tomorrow. We have senators coming. We have investors from Dubai. It is going to be a high-caliber event." He took a sip of his drink and let the silence stretch before delivering the blow. "And frankly, Calvin, you do not fit the aesthetic. Look at you. That suit is polyester. You smell like the mothballs from a thrift store. And that limp, it is distracting. It makes people uncomfortable. We are selling an image of success and power tomorrow. Having a night guard hobbling around the altar looking like he just clocked out of the graveyard shift, well, it ruins the picture." I felt a tightening in my chest. It was not shame. I have never been ashamed of my work. I work nights at the warehouse, so I do not have to ask anyone for a dime. I limp because I carried 2 wounded men 3 miles through a jungle fire. But Conrad did not see a soldier. He saw a stain on his perfect white tablecloth. "I am the groom's father," I said. "I am not a prop." Conrad waved his hand dismissively. "You are a liability. Take the 50 grand. Take a cruise. Go visit relatives in the South. Just do not be there tomorrow. Tyson understands. He agrees it is for the best." That was the moment the world stopped. The insult from Conrad meant nothing. He was an enemy, and enemies are expected to attack. But the name he had just used paralyzed me. Tyson. I slowly turned my head to the right. My son was standing near the window holding a glass of water. He was 32 years old, an architect, a man I had raised alone after his mother died. I had worked double shifts to pay for his college. I had taught him how to tie a tie, how to shave, and how to look a man in the eye when you shake his hand. But Tyson was not looking me in the eye. He was looking at the floor. He was looking at his shiny Italian shoes. He was looking anywhere but at me. "Tyson," I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. He flinched. It was a small movement, but I saw it. He took a breath and finally looked up, but his eyes were glassy and fearful. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. "Dad, please," Tyson said. His voice was thin. "Don't make a scene. Conrad is just trying to help. $50,000 is a lot of money. You could fix your roof, You could finally retire from the warehouse. I stared at him. I tried to find the boy I had raised, the boy who used to sit on my lap and ask to wear my dog tags. I searched his face for a sign of rebellion, a sign that he was playing along to survive. But there was nothing. There was only surrender. You want me to take the money? I asked. You want your father to be paid to stay away from your wedding? Tyson swallowed hard. He glanced at Conrad, who was watching him with an expectant glare. It is not like that, Dad, Tyson stammered. It is just, you know how these people are. It is a different world. You would be uncomfortable. You always say you hate crowds. We will have a private dinner next week. Just the two of us. It will be better. He was reciting a script. I could hear the rehearsal in his tone. He had traded his spine for a seat at their table. The realization hit me harder than any bullet ever could. I had survived wars, I had survived poverty, I had survived the grief of losing my wife. But I was not sure I could survive this. My son was ashamed of me. I looked back at the check. $50,000. It was more money than I made in 2 years. It could buy a new car, it could fix the roof, but it could not buy back the soul I would lose if I touched it. I reached out with my left hand, my fingers rough and calloused from years of handling crates and rifles brushed against the smooth paper. Conrad smiled. He thought he had won. He thought every man had a price, and he had just found mine. Smart choice, Calvin, Conrad said, reaching for his checkbook to close it. I knew you were a reasonable man. I picked up the check. I held it up to the light, letting them all see the zeros. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I tore it down the middle. The sound of the paper ripping was the only noise in the room. Conrad's smile vanished. His face turned a deep, ugly shade of red. Tyson gasped, taking a step forward as if he could tape the paper back together. What do you think you are doing? Conrad hissed. I tore the halves again, and again. I did not stop until the $50,000 was nothing but blue and white confetti on the table. I brushed the pieces off my hands and stood up. My knee locked, sending a spike of pain up my thigh, but I did not wince. I stood at attention, my back straight, my shoulders squared. I made myself fill the room. I do not want your money, Conrad, I said. My voice was steady, calm, dangerous. And I do not want your pity. I raised a man, not a coward. If Tyson wants to sell himself to you for a gold watch and a country club membership, that is his choice. But I am not for sale. Conrad slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Who do you think you are, you old fool? You are a nobody. You are a washed-up soldier with a minimum wage job and a delusional sense of pride. You think you can walk into my event tomorrow and ruin it. I will have security throw you out before you even get near the gate. I looked at Conrad. I looked at his soft hands and his expensive suit. I looked at the fear behind his anger. He was used to buying people. He did not know what to do with a man who wanted nothing from him. Then I looked at Tyson. He was pale, trembling slightly. He looked like he wanted to vanish into the curtains. I will be there, Tyson, I said to my son. I will be there because I promised your mother I would watch you start your life, and I keep my promises, even if you have forgotten yours. I turned back to Conrad. He was standing now, his face inches from mine. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. You are a washed-up soldier, Conrad spat the words at me. You are nothing. I leaned in. I spoke softly, so only he and Tyson could hear. A soldier is never washed up, Conrad. We just wait for the next war, and you have just started one. I turned and walked out of the room. I did not look back. I could hear Conrad shouting threats behind me, but they sounded like distant thunder. I walked through the opulent lobby of the club, past the portraits of old white men who had founded it, past the doormen who looked at my clothes with suspicion. I walked out into the parking lot and got into my rusted sedan. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of old upholstery and gasoline. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw the gray hair, the wrinkles, the tired eyes. Conrad was right about one thing. I looked like a tired old man. But appearances are deceptive. He saw a security guard. He did not know he had just insulted a man who had walked through hell and came back with a medal to prove it. I started the engine. The car coughed and sputtered before roaring to life. I was going home. but I was not going to sleep. I had work to do. I had an old trunk in my closet that I hadn't opened in 40 years. Inside that trunk was a uniform. Inside that trunk was my history, and inside that trunk was the only thing that could stop Conrad Montgomery. He wanted a show, I would give him a show. He wanted to talk about honor. I would teach him the definition of the word. I drove out of the country club gates, leaving my son behind in the golden cage he had chosen. The war had begun, and the first battle would be tomorrow right at the altar. The service corridor of the hotel smelled of industrial bleach and stale fryer grease. It was a sharp contrast to the lavender and expensive perfume that scented the ballroom 2 floors above. I stood near the loading dock checking my phone. It was the only place Tyson had agreed to meet me. He said it was safer here. Safer from whom he did not say, but we both knew the answer. I held a small velvet box in my hand. The velvet was worn, the corners bald from years of being touched, but it was sturdy. Inside was the only inheritance I had to give. It was not a check for $50,000. It was a Hamilton field watch issued in 1968. It had stopped ticking 3 times in its life. Once when I fell into a river in the Mekong Delta. Once when I was hit by shrapnel in Grenada. And once on the day my wife Esther died in my arms. I had fixed it every single time. It was not just a machine. It was proof that broken things could work again if you had the patience to mend them. I rubbed my thumb over the lid of the box, praying that the same logic applied to my relationship with my son. The heavy metal door creaked open. Tyson slipped inside, looking over his shoulder like a criminal making a drug deal. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the rehearsal dinner, but he had loosened the tie. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He did not hug me. He did not smile. He stayed near the door, keeping one hand on the handle as if he needed an escape route. "You should not be here, Dad," Tyson whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete hallway. "If Conrad finds out I came down to see you, he is going to lose his mind. He is already furious about the check. Why did you have to tear it up? It was $50,000. Do you have any idea how hard I had to work to get him to offer you that?" I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes. It was not the fear of a child afraid of the dark. It was the fear of a man who had sold his soul and was terrified the buyer would ask for a refund. "I did not come to talk about money," I said, stepping forward. Tyson flinched, stepping back. The movement was small and voluntary, and it cut me deeper than any knife. He was afraid of me. Or rather, he was afraid of being seen with me. I held out the box. "I am not coming to the wedding, Tyson," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I will respect your wish. I will not embarrass you. But a father has a duty to give his son a gift on the day he becomes the head of a new family. This was your grandfather's. It was mine. Now it is yours." Tyson looked at the box. His breathing slowed. For a second, the mask of the architect fell away, and I saw my boy again. He reached out his hand, trembling. He took the box and opened it. The old watch sat there on the faded cushion, its leather strap cracked but oiled, its face scratched but readable. "Mom wanted you to have this," I said softly. "She made me promise to give it to you when you found a woman worth dying for." Tyson stared at the watch. His eyes filled with tears. He ran a finger over the glass. "Dad," he choked out. "I remember this. You used to let me wind it on Sunday mornings. I thought you sold it to pay for my tuition." "I almost did," I admitted. "But I worked double shifts instead." "Some things are not for sale." Tyson looked up at me. The shame in his eyes was agonizing. "Dad, I am so sorry. I do not want it to be like this. Conrad is just... he is intense. He wants everything perfect. Once the wedding is over, things will calm down. I promise. We will go fishing. We will fix up the old Ford. Just give me time." He was about to say more. He was about to put the watch on his wrist. I saw his hand moving to unbutton his cuff. Then the door behind him slammed open. The noise was like a thunderclap in the small space. Tyson jumped, nearly dropping the box. Conrad Montgomery stood in the doorway. He was not alone. 2 of his private security guards loomed behind him, their arms crossed, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses even though we were indoors. Conrad looked at me, then at Tyson, and finally at the small box in Tyson's hands. His face twisted into a sneer of absolute disgust. "I knew I smelled something rotting," Conrad said, stepping into the corridor. His polished shoes clicked loudly on the concrete floor. "I told you to get rid of him, Tyson, And here you are hiding in the basement like a rat with a piece of cheese. Conrad Tyson stammered, closing the box quickly. I was just saying goodbye. He is leaving. He is leaving right now. Conrad ignored me completely. He walked straight to Tyson and held out his hand. Let me see it. Tyson hesitated. No, it is just a personal gift. It is nothing. Give it to me, Conrad barked. The command was sharp, like a master ordering a dog to drop a bone. Tyson's shoulders slumped. He handed the box to Conrad. I watched my son surrender his heritage without a fight. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stand still. This was the test. I needed to see how deep the rot went. Conrad opened the box. He picked up the watch by the strap, holding it between two fingers, as if it were a dead cockroach. He brought it up to the fluorescent light, squinting at the scratched face and the worn leather. He let out a harsh, barking laugh. This is it, Conrad asked, turning to me for the first time. This is the grand inheritance, a piece of junk you probably found in a pawn shop bin. Look at the rust. Look at the leather. It is unsanitary. It has been through 3 wars, I said, my voice low and dangerous. It has measured the heartbeat of better men than you will ever be. Conrad sneered. Sentimentality is the currency of the poor Calvin. In my world, we do not wear trash. We do not wear failure. He turned back to Tyson. You are marrying a Montgomery Tyson. You are entering a dynasty. You cannot have this garbage on your wrist. It insults the brand. It insults my daughter. Conrad, please, Tyson said, his voice weak. I will just keep it in a drawer. I won't wear it. No, Conrad said. You need to learn to let go of the past, especially a past this pathetic. Conrad raised his hand. He held the watch at a shoulder height. The concrete floor was 5 feet below. Do not do it, Conrad, I warned. I took a step forward. The 2 security guards instantly stepped in front of me, blocking my path. They were big, young, and muscular, but they did not know who I was. I calculated the distance. I could take the one on the left, out with a knee strike, then use his body to block the one on the right. It would take me 3 seconds, but I did not move, because Tyson had to be the one to move. Tyson, stop him, I said. Tyson looked at the watch dangling from Conrad's fingers. He looked at Conrad's face, which was daring him to speak. Tyson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked down at his shoes. Conrad smiled. A cruel, victorious smile. Oops, he said. He opened his fingers. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the watch fall. It tumbled through the air, the leather strap flailing. It hit the concrete face down. The sound was sickening. A sharp crunch of glass and the metallic snap of gears coming loose. The back of the case popped off and tiny springs scattered across the dirty floor. Silence filled the corridor. Tyson let out a small gasp. He instinctively bent down to reach for the pieces. Stand up, Conrad shouted. Tyson froze his hand inches from the broken remains of his mother's gift. I said, stand up. Conrad repeated, his voice cold and hard. Do not dig in the trash. You are a Montgomery now. Act like it. Slowly, painfully, Tyson straightened his back. He left the watch on the floor. He did not look at me. He could not look at me. Conrad reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek, long black box. He snapped it open. Inside sat a gold Patek Philippe encrusted with diamonds. It glittered aggressively under the harsh hallway lights. This is a watch, Conrad said. $50,000. Swiss movement, solid gold. This tells the world who you belong to. He grabbed Tyson's wrist. He did not ask. He slapped the heavy gold watch onto Tyson's arm and clasped it shut. It looked tight. It looked heavy. It looked like a golden shackle. There, Conrad said, patting Tyson's cheek with a patronizing tap. Now you look like a man. Now you look like my son-in-law. Let's go upstairs. The senator wants to meet you. Tyson stood there for a moment. He touched the gold watch. It was everything he had ever wanted, and it had cost him everything he had. Yes, Conrad, Tyson whispered. Conrad turned to leave. He stepped over the broken pieces of my watch as if they were dirt. Tyson followed him. At the door, Tyson paused. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were dead. There was no light in them, no apology, just a hollow, empty acceptance of his fate. Then the door closed, and I was alone in the silence. I waited until their footsteps faded away. Then I knelt down on the cold concrete. My bad knee screamed in protest, a sharp, biting pain that traveled up to my hip, but I welcomed it. Pain was real. Pain kept you sharp. I reached out and gathered the pieces. The glass was pulverized. The second hand was bent at a 90-degree angle. The mainspring was coiled on the floor like a dying snake. I picked them up one by one with gentle, steady hands. I found the back of the case. On the inside, the inscription was still legible, "To Calvin. Come back to me. Love, Esther." I held the broken metal in my palm. I stared at it. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the grief to overwhelm me, to make me sob like a broken old man. But the tears did not come. Instead, a coldness spread through my chest. It started in my heart and moved to my veins, freezing everything it touched. It was a familiar feeling. I had felt it in the jungle when the enemy was closing in. I had felt it in the desert when the mission went sideways. It was the feeling of a soldier engaging a target. Conrad thought he had broken a watch. He thought he had humiliated a father. He did not realize what he had actually done. He had killed Tyson. The boy who walked out that door was not my son. He was a zombie, a hollow shell animated by Conrad's money and control. My son was a prisoner of war held captive in a golden cage, and a soldier never leaves a man behind. I stood up. I put the pieces of the watch into my pocket. I did not limp as I walked to the exit. I marched. The sadness was gone. The hesitation was gone. The hope for a peaceful resolution was gone. Conrad Montgomery wanted to talk about power. He wanted to talk about what was trash and what was valuable. He had made a fatal calculation error. He thought the gold on Tyson's wrist was power. He did not know that the real power was in the information I knew how to find. I pushed open the heavy exit door and stepped out into the night air. The parking lot was dark. I looked up at the lighted windows of the ballroom on the second floor. I could see the silhouettes of people dancing, drinking, celebrating their wealth. I could imagine Conrad up there laughing, thinking he had won. "Laugh while you can, Conrad," I whispered to the dark. I walked to my car. I did not go home. I had a stop to make. There was a 24-hour internet cafe 3 miles away. And there was a phone number I had memorized 20 years ago. A number I swore I would never call unless it was a matter of life and death. Tonight my son died. And tomorrow at the wedding, I was going to resurrect him. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. It was a long road. It was a dangerous road. But I was ready. The time for being a father was over. The time for being a sergeant major had returned. The neon sign of the 24-hour internet cafe flickered with a dying buzz that sounded like an angry hornet. Inside, the air smelled of stale energy drinks and overheated plastic. A teenager with purple hair was shouting at a screen in the corner, fighting a digital war with dragons. He did not know that 3 seats away, an old man in a cheap suit was preparing to start a real war. I sat down at the terminal and wiped the grease from the keyboard with my handkerchief. My knuckles were white. The image of my son wearing that gold shackle was burned into my retinas, but I pushed it aside. Emotion is the enemy of analysis. I needed to be cold. I needed to be a hunter. I opened the search browser. My fingers, usually clumsy with touchscreens, flew across the mechanical keys. I typed the name that had haunted my evening. Conrad Montgomery. The results flooded the screen. Charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, photos of him shaking hands with senators. He looked perfect. He looked untouchable. But every fortress has a crack in the foundation if you know where to look. I did not look at the glowing articles about his real estate success. I dug deeper. I went to the second page of search results. Then the 10th. Then the 20th. I was looking for the things men like Conrad try to bury. I found a subsidiary company listed in a forgotten legal filing from 1990, Montgomery Defense Logistics. The name triggered a memory so sharp it tasted like copper in my mouth. I closed my eyes and I was back in the desert. The heat was suffocating. I was holding a young corporal named Miller. He was 19. He had been wearing a brand new flak jacket supplied by a private contractor. The shrapnel had gone right through the ceramic plate like it was made of cardboard. Miller died because someone saved $5 on manufacturing costs. I opened the corporate file for Montgomery Defense. There it was. The logo was different, but the tax identification number matched Conrad's current real estate empire. He had rebranded. He had washed the blood off his money and built mansions with it. But the blood was still there in the ledger. I printed the documents. The The printer groaned, spitting out the pages that would serve as the first nails in Conrad's coffin. I folded them and put them in my inside pocket right next to my heart. I left the cafe and walked to my car. The night air was cooling, but my blood was running hot. I had the motive. Now I needed the weapon. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a phone. It was not a smartphone. It was a heavy black satellite phone that looked like a brick. I had kept it charged for 20 years. I had paid the subscription fee every month, eating into my grocery budget just in case. Just in case the world ended. Or in case I needed the only man who owed me his life. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the stars. I extended the antenna. I dialed a number that did not exist in any public phone book. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. A normal person would have hung up. I waited. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. There was no greeting, no polite hello, just the sound of breathing on the other end. "This is Black Eagle," I said into the darkness. "I am activating the protocol from Operation Sandstorm." The silence on the other line stretched for 5 seconds. In the intelligence world, 5 seconds is an eternity. I wondered if he had forgotten. I wondered if the number now belonged to a pizza parlor. Then a voice came through. It was deep, gravelly, and commanding. It was the voice of a man who moved armies with a whisper. "Sergeant Major," the voice said, "you have been a ghost for a long time. I thought you were dead." "I am not dead yet, General," I replied. "But I have a situation. I am calling in the debt." August 2nd, 1991. The extracted team. I remember, the general said instantly. "I remember every day. You carried me 4 miles on a shattered ankle. I told you then that if you ever needed the cavalry, all you had to do was call. Name the target." "I do not need a drone strike, General," I said. "I need a presence. I need you to remind a man named Conrad Montgomery that the United States military does not forgive traitors. And I need you to bring the federal boys with you. I have the files on the defective armor plates." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Montgomery, the general, growled. "We have been trying to pin that slippery snake for a decade. We never had the paper trail connecting him to the old shell company." "You have it. I have it," I said. "And I know where he will be tomorrow." "Consider it done," the general said. "Put on your dress blues, Sergeant Major. I will see you at 0900. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was steady. The cavalry was coming. But a good soldier does not rely solely on air support. He needs eyes on the ground. I got back into my car and drove to the warehouse where I worked. It was empty at this hour. I sat at my workbench under the harsh light of a desk lamp. I pulled the pieces of the broken Hamilton watch from my pocket. I laid them out on a velvet cloth. The glass was dust. The gears were twisted. It looked hopeless. But I was not trying to fix the watch to tell time. I was turning it into a receiver. Earlier that night in the hotel corridor, I had executed a maneuver I learned in counterintelligence training. It is called the brush pass. When Conrad had his guards block me when he was dangling the watch and mocking my poverty, he made a mistake. He focused on my face. He focused on my anger. He did not watch my hands. When I had stepped forward to defend Tyson before the guard shoved me back, I had brushed my hand against the hem of Tyson's tuxedo jacket. In that split second, I had slipped a listening device the size of a shirt button into the lining of his pocket. It was a high-frequency transmitter I used for security sweeps at the warehouse. It had a range of 2 miles. I opened my toolkit and pulled out a receiver unit. I soldered a wire to the amplifier. I adjusted the frequency dial. Static hissed through the speaker. I turned the knob, slowly filtering out the background noise of the city. White noise. Traffic. Then voices. Crystal clear voices. I leaned in. The signal was coming from the penthouse suite of the hotel. I could hear the clink of glasses. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. "Stop crying, Tyson," a voice sneered. It was Conrad. "You are embarrassing yourself. It was a cheap piece of junk. You should be thanking me." I heard a sniffle. "It was my son. Dad, it meant something to him. You didn't have to break it." "Grow up," Conrad snapped. "I am building you a future. Tomorrow you marry Vanessa. You shake hands with the senator. We sign the zoning permits for the new development project. Do you know how much that project is worth? $80 million. Do you want to trade $80 million for a rusty watch from a senile old security guard?" There was a pause. I held my breath. I wanted Tyson to scream. I wanted him to punch Conrad. I wanted him to walk out. No. Conrad Tyson's voice was barely a whisper. "I want the deal." "Good," Conrad said. And do not worry about the old man. If he shows up tomorrow, the sheriff has orders to arrest him for trespassing. We will lock him up until the honeymoon is over. He is a nobody. He has no power. He has no friends. He is just a footnote in our success story. I stared at the spinning reels of the receiver. Conrad was wrong. I was not a footnote. I was the author of the next chapter, and he had just confessed to his conspiracy on an open line. I hit the record button. The red light blinked steadily in the darkness of the warehouse. It looked like a watching eye. I looked at the broken pieces of my wife's watch. I could not repair the gears. I could not put the glass back together. But the watch had served its final purpose. It had been the distraction I needed to plant the bug. It had sacrificed itself to give me the truth. I sat back in my chair and listened to them plot the rest of their evening. They talked about bribes. They talked about cutting corners on concrete. They talked about me as if I were a dead dog on the side of the road. I let them talk. I let them dig their own graves with every word. Tomorrow, I would not just be a father attending a wedding. I would be a judgment arriving in a storm. I reached into my locker and pulled out my garment bag. I unzipped it slowly. The dark blue fabric of my uniform caught the light. The gold chevrons on the sleeves were bright and untarnished. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was heavy. It carried the weight of history. It carried the weight of every man who had stood beside me and every man who had fallen. Conrad Montgomery had called me a washed-up soldier. He was about to find out that old soldiers do not fade away. We just regroup. I checked the recording one last time. The evidence was secure. The general was en route. The trap was set. I turned off the lights in the warehouse. I did not need to see. I knew exactly where I was going. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my small apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. On the bed lay the only suit that had ever truly fit me. It was not the polyester jacket Conrad had mocked. It was the dress blues of the United States Marine Corps. The midnight blue tunic was heavy wool, stiff and unforgiving. The red piping was vibrant, a blood stripe running down the trousers that signified the blood shed by officers and non-commissioned officers at the Battle of Chapultepec. To civilians, it is a costume. To me, it is a second skin that I earned through 30 years of service. I began the ritual. It was a process I had performed thousands of times, but today every motion felt like a prayer. I polished the brass buttons until they gleamed like small suns. I shined my black shoes until I could see the reflection of a man who refused to be broken. I did not rush. Rush leads to mistakes, and today there was no margin for error. I pulled on the trousers. They were snug around the waist, but my posture corrected itself instantly. My spine straightened, my chin lifted. The pain in my left knee, usually a dull roar, faded into the background noise of my focus. I buttoned the tunic. The high collar pressed against my neck, forcing my head high. I pinned my ribbons to my chest, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the campaign medals from places most people could not find on a map. I looked at the empty space at the very top of the rack. That was where the Medal of Honor belonged. I took the star-shaped medal from its case. The blue ribbon felt cool against my fingers. I placed it around my neck, tucking the medal itself beneath the lapel of my jacket. It rested against my heart, a hidden sun waiting to rise. I did not wear it to show off. I wore it because it was the ultimate truth in a room full of lies. I looked in the mirror. The night security guard was gone. The tired old man was gone. Staring back at me was Sergeant Major Calvin Rhodes. I picked up my white cover and placed it squarely on my head. I was not dressing for a wedding. I was dressing for an invasion. The taxi ride to the Montgomery estate was long and quiet. The driver was a young man who kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, clearly confused by the contrast between my uniform and the destination. We turned off the highway onto a private road lined with oak trees. Ahead of us, a line of luxury cars stretched for a quarter mile. Bentleys, Mercedes, and limousines hummed with quiet power. My yellow taxi rattled and shook a sore thumb in a sea of diamonds. We reached the main gate. It was a massive iron structure guarded by men in black suits with earpieces. These were not police. They were private contractors, mercenaries paid to keep reality out of Conrad's fantasy world. The taxi driver rolled down his window. Name the guard asked, not even looking up from his tablet. "Calvin Rhodes," I said from the back seat. My voice was projected clear and firm. The guard paused. He swiped on his screen. Then he stopped. He looked at the tablet, then at the taxi, and finally at me. A smirk touched the corner of his lip. "Turn around," The guard said. "You are not on the list." "Check again," I said. "I am the groom's father." The guard chuckled. He leaned down, resting his arm on the taxi window, violating my space. "Look, pal, I have specific instructions from Mr. Montgomery himself. The groom's father is unable to attend due to health reasons. That is the official story. Now, unless you want to be arrested for trespassing, tell your driver to back this piece of junk up and get lost." The taxi driver looked at me nervous. "Sir, I do not want any trouble. Maybe we should go." I did not move. I looked at the guard. He was young. He stood with his weight on one leg, sloppy and arrogant. He thought the earpiece and the gun under his jacket made him powerful. "You are making a mistake, son," I said. "I am giving you a chance to correct it. Open the gate." The guard laughed out loud. "Or what? You are going to storm the castle." "Go home, old man. This is a private event for VIPs. We do not let the help in through the front door." Behind us, a horn honked impatiently. It was a silver Rolls-Royce. The passengers were staring annoyed that a taxi was blocking their entrance. I felt the heat rising in my collar. It was not just the rejection, it was the erasure. Conrad was not just banning me. He was rewriting reality, telling the world I was sick or dead, so he did not have to explain my existence. I opened the door and stepped out. The guard's hand dropped to his waist, hovering near his weapon. "Get back in the vehicle," he barked. I stood to my full height. The uniform commanded attention. For a second, the guard hesitated, his training battling with his orders. But the orders won. "I said leave," he shouted, stepping into my face. Just then, a white stretch limousine slowed down as it passed through the open lane next to us. The window in the back was tinted, but it slid down a few inches. I saw a flash of white lace. I saw a perfectly made-up face. It was Vanessa, my future daughter-in-law. Our eyes met. I stood there, a man in full uniform being threatened by a hired thug. She looked at me. There was no surprise in her eyes. No shock. She knew. She knew about the check. She knew about the ban. She knew about the lies. "Vanessa," I said. She did not speak. She did not tell the driver to stop. She simply pressed the button and the black glass slid back up, erasing me from her view. The limousine accelerated, disappearing up the driveway toward the mansion. That was the moment the last thread of hope snapped. I had thought perhaps she was innocent in this. I had thought perhaps Tyson was the only one being manipulated. But she was a Montgomery. She had inherited her father's ability to look at a human being and see nothing. The guard shoved my shoulder. "I told you to move." I looked at his hand on my uniform. I could have broken his wrist. I could have dislocated his shoulder and put him on the ground before he could draw his weapon, my muscles coiled, ready to strike. But that is what Conrad wanted. He wanted a brawl. He wanted a reason to call the police and show the world that I was a violent, unstable man. I brushed his hand away. "I do not need to fight you," I said. "I have other ways." I got back into the taxi. The driver looked relieved. "Where to, buddy?" "Back to the city." "No," I said. "Pull over to the side of the road just out of sight of the gate." "But sir," the driver stammered. "Just do it," I ordered. He pulled the car onto the grass shoulder 100 yards down the road. The line of luxury cars continued to flow past us, ignoring the yellow cab in the ditch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the satellite phone. I dialed the number again. "General," I said when the line opened. "Access denied at the main gate. Hostiles are entrenched." I heard the deep rumble of General Higgins' laugh on the other end. It was a sound like rocks grinding together. "Figured as much," the general said. "Conrad likes his walls. Good thing we do not believe in walls." "What is the ETA?" I asked. "Look up," the general said. I looked out the window. Far in the distance above the tree line, I saw a black dot against the blue sky. It was growing larger. The rhythmic thumping of rotors began to vibrate in my chest. It was a sound I had slept to, eaten to, and fought to for 30 years. "Is that a Blackhawk?" the taxi driver asked, his eyes wide. "No," I said, checking my tie in the rearview mirror one last time. "That is my ride." I paid the driver and tipped him $50. "Go home, son," I said. "You do not want to be here for what happens next." I stepped out of the car and stood in the open field. The wind from the approaching helicopter whipped the grass into a frenzy. I held my cover on my head. I watched the bird descend, a dark angel coming to deliver justice. The private security guards at the gate were looking up now, pointing and shouting into their radios. They were confused. They were scared. They should be. I was not entering as a guest anymore. I was invading. And unlike Conrad Montgomery, I did not bring lawyers. I brought the United States Cavalry. The wedding reception was set on the grand lawn behind the Montgomery estate. It was a masterpiece of excess. White silk tents billowed gently in the breeze. Tables were set with crystal glasses that sparkled like diamonds under the midday sun. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the crowd of 300 guests offering champagne and caviar. At the front of the gathering, a raised stage had been erected, draped in patriotic bunting that felt more like a political rally than a wedding. Conrad Montgomery stood at the podium. He loved a microphone. He loved the sound of his own voice amplifying across the manicured grass. He adjusted his silk tie and looked out at the sea of faces. Senators, judges, and business tycoons looked back at him. To his right stood my son Tyson and his daughter Vanessa. Tyson looked like a statue carved from ice. He was wearing the tuxedo Conrad had paid for and the gold watch Conrad had shackled him with. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, seeing nothing. Conrad tapped the microphone twice. The feedback whine died down, bringing a hush to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Conrad began, his voice dripping with false humility. "Today we celebrate the union of two hearts, but we also celebrate something greater. We celebrate the American dream." He paused for effect. A few people clapped politely. Conrad smiled, soaking it in. "As you all know, Montgomery Defense Corp has always been a pillar of support for our brave men and women in uniform. We build the armor that protects them. We build the homes they return to. Just this week, I authorized a new housing initiative for veterans right here in our county, because freedom is not free, and those of us who have been blessed with success have a duty to give back to those who sacrificed everything." I listened to this from the edge of the property hidden by the tree line. The lie tasted like bile in my throat. This was the man who had sold defective armor plates that shattered like glass. This was the man who was building his daughter's mansion on top of a bulldozed veterans' cemetery. And now he was standing there wrapping himself in the flag to hide his greed. Conrad continued, gesturing toward Tyson. "My new son-in-law Tyson understands this legacy. He comes from a humble background. His father could not be here today due to health issues, a tragedy of old age, really. But Tyson has risen above his circumstances. He has embraced the Montgomery way. He understands that true patriotism is about building the future, not clinging to the past." Tyson flinched slightly at the mention of my name, but he did not speak. He did not defend me. He just touched the heavy gold watch on his wrist and looked down. Conrad raised his glass. "So let us toast to the future, to power, to legacy, and to the unstoppable force of American industry." The guests raised their glasses. The crystal chimed softly. It was a perfect picture of corruption masquerading as nobility. And then the champagne in the glasses began to ripple. It started as a low vibration felt in the chest before it was heard. The water in the flower vases trembled. The silverware on the tables began to rattle against the china. Conrad frowned, looking around. He thought it was a passing truck or perhaps an issue with the sound system. He tapped the microphone again, annoyed. "Is there a problem with the feedback?" he snapped at the sound technician. But it was not feedback. The low rumble deepened into a rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. It grew louder with every second, a percussive beat that synced with the pounding of my heart. The wind began to pick up, not a gentle breeze, but a sudden violent gust that whipped the tablecloths and sent napkins flying into the air like white surrender flags. A woman in the front row screamed as her hat was blown off her head. The neatly arranged floral arches began to sway dangerously. The guests looked up, shielding their eyes against the sun. And then the shadow fell over them. From the south, rising over the line of oak trees, a dark shape blotted out the sun. It was not a news helicopter. It was not a private charter. It was a Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk. It was matte black, devoid of civilian markings, screaming with the power of twin turboshaft engines. The downwash from the rotors hit the lawn with the force of a hurricane. The white silk tents buckled. The crystal glasses shattered. The meticulously arranged seating chart was blown into chaos. Conrad stood on the stage, his hair whipped across his face, his mouth open in a silent scream that was swallowed by the roar of the machine. The helicopter did not circle. It did not ask for permission. It banked sharply, the nose dipping aggressively as it aimed for the center of the golf course directly behind the wedding altar. The pilots were military. I could tell by the precision of the descent. They put the massive machine down right on top of the 18th hole green, the landing gear sinking into the pristine turf that Conrad spent thousands of dollars maintaining every month. The engines did not shut down. The rotors continued to spin, keeping the guests pinned in a vortex of wind and noise. Dust and grass clippings filled the air. The private security guards, the ones who had bullied me at the gate, were running around like headless chickens holding their earpieces, shouting orders that no one could hear. Then the side doors of the Blackhawk slid open. This was the moment, the payoff. 4 figures jumped out. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were wearing full combat tactical gear, helmets, vests, rifles slung across their chests, barrels pointed strictly at the ground but ready. They moved with a fluidity that only comes from years of drilling. They fanned out, creating a secure perimeter around the aircraft. They did not look at the screaming guests. They did not look at the furious Conrad. They looked like statues of war dropped into a garden party. Conrad grabbed the microphone, screaming over the noise. "Who are you? Get off my property. This is a private event. Security, security, arrest them." 2 of his private guards, emboldened by their paychecks, reached for their holsters and started to move toward the soldiers. One of the soldiers simply raised his hand. Palm out. Stop. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of the United States government. The private guards froze. They looked at the assault rifles. They looked at the helicopter. They looked at their own small pistols. And they stopped. They backed away, hands raised. They were bullies, not warriors. They knew the difference between a paycheck and a death wish. The dust began to settle, though the rotors kept spinning. The soldier in the center turned back to the helicopter and offered a hand. I stepped out. I was no longer the man in the rusted sedan. The dress blues were immaculate. The white cover sat perfectly on my head. The gold buttons caught the sun. But it was the metal around my neck that seemed to generate its own light. The Medal of Honor. The blue ribbon stark against the dark tunic, the star resting on my chest. I adjusted my white gloves. I took a step forward onto the grass. The pain in my knee was gone. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic. I began to walk toward the stage. It was a long walk, perhaps 50 yards. The wind from the rotors pushed at my back, propelling me forward. The guests parted. They did not mean to, but instinct drove them to move. They saw the uniform. They saw the medal. They saw the 4 armed soldiers flanking me, moving in perfect lockstep with my pace. A hush fell over the crowd, deeper than the silence Conrad had commanded. This was not the silence of politeness. It was the silence of awe. Conrad stood on the stage, gripping the podium so hard his knuckles were white. His face was a mask of disbelief and terror. He looked at me, and for the first time he really saw me. He did not see a security guard. He saw the enemy. "Stop him!" Conrad shrieked, his voice cracking. "Someone stop him! He is trespassing. He is violent." He pointed at the local sheriff, who was standing near the buffet table with a drink in his hand. "Sheriff, do your job. Shoot him if you have to." The sheriff looked at Conrad. Then he looked at me. He looked at the soldiers behind me. He looked at the Medal of Honor. The sheriff set his drink down. He straightened his uniform, and as I passed him, he did not reach for his gun. He snapped his heels together and raised his hand in a sharp, crisp salute. Conrad's jaw dropped. I kept walking. I did not look left or right. My eyes were locked on 2 people, my son and the man who held his leash. Tyson was staring at me. His mouth was slightly open. He looked at the uniform he had never seen me wear. He looked at the soldiers who were acting as my honor guard. Tears began to stream down his face. I do not know if they were tears of pride or shame, but they were real. Vanessa looked terrified. She took a step back, hiding behind Tyson. The arrogance she had shown in the limousine was gone, replaced by the realization that money cannot buy protection from everything. I reached the bottom of the stage stairs. The 4 soldiers stopped and turned outward, creating a wall of steel between the crowd and me. I climbed the steps. 1, 2, 3. The sound of my boots on the wood was heavy and deliberate. I stopped 3 feet from Conrad. Up close, he smelled of sweat and expensive cologne. He was shaking. "You," Conrad whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You ruined it. You ruined everything. You washed up old piece of trash." I looked at him. I looked at the fear in his eyes. I reached up and slowly removed my white glove from my right hand. I tucked it into my belt. "I am not washed up, Conrad," I said, my voice projecting without a microphone, clear and strong enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "I am a United States Marine, and I have taken hills steeper than your ego." Conrad lunged at me. It was a desperate, foolish move. He raised his fist, intending to strike an officer of the military in full dress uniform. Before he could make contact, a laser sight dot appeared on his forehead. Red, steady, unblinking. Conrad froze. He looked down at his chest. Another red dot. He looked at the soldiers below. Their rifles were raised. "Don't," I said calmly, "unless you want this wedding to turn into a funeral." Conrad lowered his hand slowly. He was defeated physically, but his eyes still burned with hate. "You have no authority here," Conrad hissed. "This is private property." I smiled. It was a cold smile. "You are right," I said. "I have no authority over your property, but the man in the helicopter does." I pointed back at the Black Hawk. The side door opened wider. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform covered in stars. 4 stars. General Higgins walked onto the grass. He did not need a weapon. His presence was the weapon. Conrad looked at the general. He looked at me. And in that moment he realized that the game had changed. He wasn't playing against a night guard anymore. He was playing against the Brotherhood, and he had just lost the first hand. The distance between the bottom of the stairs and the center of the stage was only 10 steps, but it felt like I was crossing a bridge between 2 different worlds. Behind me, the chaos of the helicopter landing had settled into a tense, vibrating silence. The rotors were slowing down, the whine of the engines dropping to a low hum that sounded like a sleeping beast waiting to wake up. Ahead of me stood Conrad Montgomery. He was no longer the composed billionaire. His hair was a mess from the wind. His face was purple with a rage that he could barely contain. To his right, my son Tyson stood frozen, his hand still gripping Vanessa's arm, his eyes locked on me with a mixture of terror and confusion. He had never seen me like this. He had only known the father who limped to the kitchen to make coffee, or the security guard who came home with aching feet. He did not know the man who was walking toward him now. I took the first step. My polished black shoe hit the wooden riser with a solid thud. I took the second step. The 4 soldiers behind me moved in perfect unison, their boots hitting the ground at the exact same millisecond. The sound was like a hammer striking an anvil. It was the sound of discipline marching into a house of disorder. Conrad saw me coming. He looked at the general standing on the lawn, then he looked back at me. Panic flared in his eyes. He realized that for the first time in his life he could not buy his way out of a situation. He could not call a lawyer to stop a Marine sergeant major who was walking with the authority of history on his shoulders. So he did the only thing a bully knows how to do. He tried to use force. "Get down!" Conrad shouted. He rushed to the edge of the stage, blocking my path. "You are not coming up here. This is my stage. This is my moment. Get back to the gutter where you belong." He reached out. His hand, shaking and sweaty, grabbed the lapel of my dress blues. He tried to shove me backward. It was a mistake. I did not stumble. I did not move an inch. I am 70 years old, but my roots go down deep into the earth. I planted my feet and let him push against a stone wall. I looked down at his hand touching my uniform. It was a violation. That uniform was not just cloth. It was the shroud of the men who had died next to me. "Remove your hand, Conrad," I said. My voice was low, but it carried the friction of a grinding stone. Conrad blinked. He tried to push again, but he was pushing against 30 years of combat conditioning. "I said, get down!" he screamed, his voice cracking. I brought my hand up. I did not strike him. I simply gripped his wrist. I squeezed. Just a little. Just enough to let him feel the difference between gym muscles and work muscles. Conrad gasped, his knees buckling slightly as the pressure hit a nerve. He let go of my jacket. I released him, and he stumbled back, crashing into the podium. The microphone screeched. I stepped onto the platform. I was now standing center stage. I looked out at the audience. There were 300 people sitting on the lawn. Senators, judges, CEOs, men who ran the country, men who thought they were the gods of this world. They were staring at me. Some looked annoyed, some looked amused, but most looked confused. They saw an old black man in a uniform interrupting a high society wedding. They were waiting for the punchline. They were waiting for security to drag me away so they could go back to drinking their champagne. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the white handkerchief I had used to cover the medals on my chest during the ride over. I had kept it covered because I did not want to draw attention until the time was right. But the time was right now. I looked at Tyson. "Look at me, son," I said. Tyson looked up. He was trembling. "You wanted to know who I am," I said. "You wanted to know why I am not a rich man. You wanted to know why I work in a warehouse instead of a boardroom. You thought it was because I failed." I paused. The wind rustled the flags behind me. I did not fail Tyson. I chose a different kind of currency. I pulled the handkerchief away. The sun hit the metal. It flared with a brilliance that seemed to scorch the air. The gold star surrounded by the green wreath of laurel hung from the pale blue ribbon around my neck. It sat at the very top of my chest, above the purple heart, above the silver star, above everything else. The Medal of Honor. For a second there was absolute silence. It was a vacuum. No one breathed. No one moved. Then the reaction started. It began in the third row. An old man sitting in a wheelchair wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my house gasped. He was Senator Williams, a man known for his ruthless politics. But before he was a senator, he had been a lieutenant in Vietnam. He knew what that blue ribbon meant. He knew that you did not buy it. You did not campaign for it. You paid for it with blood. Senator Williams tried to stand. His legs were weak, but he forced himself up. He pushed his aide away. He stood on trembling legs, his eyes locked on the medal. Then the man next to him stood. It was a retired admiral. He dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered on the grass, but he did not look down. He straightened his back and snapped into a position of attention that he probably hadn't held in 20 years. A ripple effect moved through the crowd. The civilians, the bankers, and the debutantes, they did not understand at first. They looked around confused. Why were the most powerful men in the room standing up for the wedding crasher? Why were the generals and the judges bowing their heads? Then they saw the faces of the veterans. They saw the tears streaming down the cheeks of men who never cried. They saw the sweat breaking out on the foreheads of politicians who realized they were in the presence of something holy. One by one the guests stood. It was not a choice. It was a wave of biological imperative. When a Medal of Honor recipient enters the room, you stand. It is the law of the warrior, and it overrides the law of the rich. Within 30 seconds, every single person on that lawn was standing. The silence was heavy, thick with awe and shame. Conrad looked out at the crowd. He looked at his guests, the people he had spent millions to impress. They were not looking at him. They were looking through him. They were looking at me. "Sit down," Conrad hissed, waving his arms at the audience. "Why are you standing? Sit down. He is nobody. It is a prop. It is a fake." "Senator Williams," the man in the third row spoke up. His voice was frail but sharp. "Shut your mouth," Conrad the senator said. "That is the Congressional Medal of Honor. If you say one more word of disrespect, I will personally ensure you never get another government contract as long as you live." Conrad froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond losing money. He was losing his reality. I took a step closer to the microphone. I did not need it, but I used it anyway. I wanted my voice to reach the back of the estate. I wanted the ancestors buried beneath this ground to hear me. I touched the medal on my chest. It felt cold against my skin, but it burned with the heat of memory. "Conrad called me a washed-up soldier," I said. My voice echoed across the lawn. "He told my son that I was an embarrassment. He offered me $50,000 to disappear." A gasp went through the crowd. People turned to look at Conrad with disgust. $50,000, I repeated. To Conrad, that is a lot of money. To him, everything has a price tag. A house, a wife, a son, a senator. I looked at the medal. "But this," I said, tapping the gold star, "this does not have a price. You cannot buy this on the stock market. You cannot inherit this from your father." I looked directly at Tyson. "I earned this in a valley called A Shao," I said. "I earned this when I ran back into a burning transport helicopter 3 times to pull my men out. I earned this when I took 2 bullets in my leg and 1 in my shoulder and kept firing so my squad could evacuate. I earned this while holding the hand of a 19-year-old boy named Miller as he bled out in the mud calling for his mother." Tyson was crying openly now. His shoulders shook. He looked at the gold watch on his wrist, the Patek Philippe that Conrad had given him. He looked at it like it was a poisonous spider. "Conrad told you that value comes from what you own," I continued. "He told you that dignity comes from a bank account. He lied to you, son." I pointed a finger at Conrad. He shrank back against the floral archway, looking small and pathetic in his expensive suit. "This man is poor," I said. "He is the poorest man I have ever met. He has millions of dollars, but he has 0 honor. He builds houses on graves. He sells defective armor to the government. He buys people because he knows that if he didn't pay them, no one would stand next to him." I turned back to the crowd. "I am a night security guard. I drive a 2004 sedan. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. But when I walk into a room, generals stand up. When I sleep at night, I sleep with a clean conscience. That is what this medal means. It means that I serve something bigger than myself. I looked at Conrad one last time. You wanted the spotlight, Conrad. You wanted to show everyone who you are. Well, look around. They see you, and they see me. Conrad looked at the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes were staring at him with judgment. The illusion of his power had evaporated. He was naked in his greed. He looked at the general standing near the helicopter. He looked at the FBI agents who were now moving in from the perimeter, their badges flashing in the sun. He realized then that the check he wrote me was the most expensive check he had ever written. It had cost him his life. I turned my back on him. I faced my son. Tyson, I said softly. Tyson looked up. His face was wet with tears. Take it off, I said. Tyson looked at his wrist. He looked at the gold watch. Take it off, I repeated. You are a Rhodes. We do not wear chains. Tyson reached for the clasp. His hands were shaking, but he found the strength. He undid the latch. The heavy gold watch slid off his wrist. He held it for a second, weighing it. Then he let it drop. It hit the wooden stage with a hollow thud. Tyson stepped over it. He walked toward me. He did not look at Conrad. He did not look at Vanessa. He walked until he was standing right in front of me. He looked at the metal. He looked at my eyes. Dad, he whispered. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I said. He hugged me. It was not the polite hug of a son doing his duty. It was a desperate cling. He buried his face in my shoulder, sobbing into the wool of my uniform. I wrapped my arms around him. I felt the general step up onto the stage behind me. I felt the FBI agents moving past us to surround Conrad, but I did not watch them. I just held my son. The war was over. We had won. But now we had to rebuild. And the first brick was love. The hug lasted for 10 seconds. For those 10 seconds, the world was perfect. My son was in my arms, the heavy gold watch lay rejected on the floor, and the silence of the crowd felt like respect. I allowed myself to close my eyes and breathe in the scent of the moment. I thought the battle was won. I thought the truth was a sword that cut through everything instantly. But I had forgotten one thing about men like Conrad Montgomery. They do not fight with swords. They fight with mud. They fight with poison. And when they are cornered, they do not surrender. They just scream louder. The scream tore through the silence like a jagged piece of metal. Liar. Conrad pushed himself away from the podium. His face was no longer pale with shock. It was red with the frantic energy of a cornered rat. He pointed a shaking finger at my chest. He pointed at the blue ribbon. He pointed at the star that represented the lives of my friends. It is a fake, Conrad bellowed. His voice cracked, desperate to regain control of the narrative. Look at him. Look at his shoes. Look at his cheap haircut. He turned to the crowd, waving his arms like a conductor trying to restart a crashed orchestra. Do you people honestly believe this? Do you believe a night security guard who makes $12 an hour is a war hero? Do you believe a man who lives in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat has a Medal of Honor? It is impossible. The crowd shifted. The guests who had stood up began to look at each other. The spell of the moment was breaking. Doubt is a contagious disease, and Conrad was spreading it with every word. I saw a woman in the second row sit back down, then a man in the fourth row. The logic of their world was reasserting itself. In their world, heroes were rich. In their world, success looked like a suit from Italy, not a uniform from a surplus store. If I was really a hero, why was I poor? That was the question burning in their eyes. Conrad saw the doubt taking root, and he lunged for it. He bought it on the internet, Conrad shouted, laughing hysterically. It is stolen valor. That is what it is. He went on eBay and bought a prop to crash my daughter's wedding. He is not a hero. He is a fraud. He is a mentally unstable old man who is jealous of my success. He turned to me, his eyes wild. Admit it, Calvin. Admit you bought that piece of tin at a pawn shop. You want to be special so bad that you committed a federal crime. You are disgusting. You are spitting on the graves of real soldiers. The accusation hit me harder than a physical blow. Stolen valor. It is the ugliest phrase a veteran can hear. It is the act of stealing the glory of the dead. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten until my teeth ached. I wanted to reach out and silence him. I wanted to tell him about the weight of the bodies I carried. I wanted to tell him about the nightmares that woke me up screaming for 20 years. But I stood still. A general does not bark at a dog. However, the person next to me was not a general. He was my son, and he was weak. Tyson pulled away from me. The warmth of his hug evaporated, instantly replaced by a sudden, chilling distance. He looked at Conrad, who was nodding fervently, encouraging the suspicion. Then he looked at me. He looked at the metal, and then he looked at my eyes. "Dad," Tyson whispered. I waited. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say that he knew his father was an honest man. "Is it true?" Tyson asked. The question hung in the air between us. It was a knife in my gut. "What are you asking me, Tyson?" I said. My voice was quiet, but it was filled with a sadness so deep it felt like drowning. Tyson stepped back. He looked terrified. "You never told me," he stammered. "I grew up with you. I saw you working double shifts. I saw you struggling to pay the electric bill. You never mentioned a medal. You never mentioned the president. You never mentioned being a hero. Why would you hide it unless—" He trailed off, but the end of the sentence was clear. "Unless it was a lie." I looked at my son. I realized then how deep Conrad's poison had gone. He had raised Tyson to believe that everything of value must be displayed. If you have money, you buy a sports car. If you have power, you buy a big house. If you have a medal, you wear it to parties. He could not comprehend a value system where honor is a private burden, not a public trophy. "Tyson," I said gently, "I did not tell you because the medal is not a prize. It is a reminder of the worst day of my life. I did not tell you because I wanted you to see me as your father, not as a survivor of a massacre. I wanted to protect you from the blood on this ribbon." Tyson shook his head. He looked confused. "It does not make sense, Dad. Conrad says people like us do not get these things." "Conrad says," I repeated. "Tyson, look at me, not at him. Look at your father. Do I look like a liar to you?" Tyson looked at me. I saw the conflict in his soul. He wanted to believe me, but he had spent 5 years living in Conrad's world, eating Conrad's food, listening to Conrad's voice. The conditioning was too strong. He lowered his eyes. He stepped further away from me, back toward the middle ground between the soldier and the millionaire. "I do not know what to believe," Tyson whispered. That sentence broke my heart more than the broken watch ever could. I had lost him again. Not to money this time, but to doubt. Conrad saw the separation. He saw Tyson step back. He saw the guests sitting down, murmuring, looking at me with suspicion. He seized the moment. He knew he had to act before the general or the FBI agents could intervene. He needed to humiliate me. He needed to drag me off the stage in handcuffs to prove his dominance. Sheriff Conrad screamed. He pointed to the side of the stage. The sheriff was still standing there. He had saluted me earlier, but Conrad was too blind with rage to have noticed. Or perhaps he simply assumed that his payroll was stronger than a salute. "Sheriff Miller, get over here," Conrad barked. "Do your job. This man is trespassing. He is disturbing the peace. And now he is committing federal fraud by impersonating a military officer. I want him arrested. I want him in handcuffs. Now." The sheriff looked at me. He looked at the general standing behind me. He looked at the FBI agents who were closing in from the perimeter. Then he looked at Conrad. Conrad did not see the trap closing. He only saw his own authority. "What are you waiting for?" Conrad yelled. "I pay your election campaign funds. I pay for your department's new cruisers. Get up here and arrest this fraud before I ruin you, too." The crowd held its breath. They loved a spectacle. They wanted to see if the sheriff would side with the money or the intruder. I looked at the sheriff. I knew him. Not personally, but I knew the type. He was a man who had likely compromised his morals for years to stay in power in a town run by a tyrant. But every man has a line, and Conrad had just crossed it by insulting the uniform the sheriff himself had once sworn to respect. I did not move. I did not run. I stood at attention, my hands at my sides, my chest proud. "If you are going to arrest me, Sheriff," I said calmly, "you better bring your best handcuffs, because I am not going anywhere." Conrad smirked. He thought he had won. He thought the law was his dog to command. "Get him!" Conrad hissed to the sheriff. "Drag him out!" The sheriff took a deep breath. He adjusted his belt. He walked up the stairs of the stage. The wood creaked under his boots. He walked past Tyson, who was trembling. He walked past Conrad, who was pointing at me with a triumphant grin. The sheriff stopped in front of me. He was a big man, heavy with age and bad food, but his eyes were clear. He looked at the medal again. He looked at the name tag on my uniform. Roads. Then slowly he reached for his belt. Conrad laughed. "That is right. Cuff him. Throw him in the back of the cruiser." I watched the sheriff's hand. He did not reach for his handcuffs. He reached for his radio. Conrad stopped laughing. The sheriff pressed the button on his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Miller," he said. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Send backup. I have a situation at the Montgomery estate," Good Conrad said. "Bring the whole squad." The sheriff turned to face Conrad. "Yes, send the squad," the sheriff continued into the radio. "And call the federal prosecutor. We have a confession of bribery and intimidation on public record." Conrad's face went white. "What did you say?" Conrad whispered. The sheriff looked at Conrad with pure disgust. "I said you are done, Conrad. I am not arresting the sergeant major." Conrad spluttered. "You work for me. I own you." "Not today," the sheriff said. "Today I work for the Constitution, and you just declared war on the wrong man." Conrad looked around wildly. He looked at Tyson. He looked at the crowd. He realized the walls were closing in. But he had one last card to play. He always had one last card. "You are all crazy," Conrad screamed. "I am Conrad Montgomery. I built this town. You cannot touch me." He reached into his jacket pocket. It was a sudden, violent movement. The 4 soldiers behind me raised their rifles instantly. The click of safety catches being released echoed across the lawn. "Drop it," one of the soldiers shouted. Conrad pulled his hand out. He was not holding a weapon. He was holding his phone. He held it up like a shield. "I am calling the governor," Conrad yelled. "I am calling the White House. You are all going to lose your jobs. You are all going to burn." I took one step forward. I was now inches from him. I could see the sweat dripping down his forehead. I could smell the fear radiating off him. "Make the call, Conrad," I said softly, "but make it quick. Because the man standing behind me is not just a general. He is the man who advises the president on who to trust. And guess what? He stopped trusting you 10 minutes ago." Conrad looked past me. General Higgins was smiling. It was a wolf's smile. Conrad's phone slipped from his fingers. It hit the stage floor with a crack. It landed right next to the broken gold watch. 2 broken symbols of power lying in the dust. But Conrad was not ready to kneel, not yet. He looked at Tyson. He saw the boy standing alone, confused and broken. And in that moment, Conrad decided that if he was going down, he was going to take my heart with him. "Tyson," Conrad said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Do you want to know the real reason your father never told you about the medal I froze? Ask him." Conrad smiled. "Ask him about the men who didn't come back. Ask him whose fault it was." Tyson looked at me. The doubt flared again in his eyes. Conrad was playing dirty. He was digging into the trauma I had buried for 40 years. He was going to weaponize my grief. I closed my eyes. I felt the phantom pain in my leg. I heard the chopper blades. I heard the screams. Conrad laughed. "See? He can't even look at you. He is not a hero, Tyson. He is a butcher." The crowd gasped. I opened my eyes. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "You want to talk about the dead, Conrad?" I asked. "Fine, let's talk about the dead. But let's talk about the ones you killed first." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the file with the blood-red confidential stamp, the file about the armor plates. I threw it on the podium. "Read it," I said. "Read it to the crowd, or I will." The file landed on the podium with a slap that echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. But Conrad did not read it. He did not even look at it. He was past the point of reading. He was in survival mode, and his survival instinct screamed for violence. He looked at the sheriff, his eyes bulging with the desperation of a man watching his kingdom crumble. "Arrest him!" Conrad screamed, spraying saliva into the microphone. "I gave you a direct order, Miller. Get this trash off my stage." The air shifted. The tension that had been simmering boiled over. The sheriff's deputies, 3 young men with thick necks and itchy trigger fingers, did not look at the general. They did not look at the FBI agents who were still holding the perimeter. They only looked at their boss, Sheriff Miller, and the billionaire who paid for their overtime. They saw an old man in a costume causing trouble. They saw a threat to the established order. One of the deputies, a man with a buzz cut and eyes devoid of imagination, lunged forward. He moved fast, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He did not ask me to turn around. He grabbed my left arm, the one with the shrapnel scars, and twisted it behind my back with unnecessary force. A sharp bolt of pain shot up to my shoulder, waking up old nerve damage, but I did not grunt. I did not resist. I let him twist. I needed everyone to see this. I needed the world to see the brutality of Conrad's payroll. "You have the right to remain silent," the deputy barked, jamming his knee into the back of my thigh to force me down. I did not remain silent. I looked straight ahead, my eyes locked on the sheriff who was walking up the stairs. "Is this how it ends, Miller?" I asked. My voice was calm, cutting through the chaos. "You are going to let a boy break the arm of a superior officer." The deputy shoved my head down, trying to force me to bow. "Stop talking, old man," he sneered. "You are done." Conrad was laughing. It was a high, jagged sound. "That is right. Break him. Show him who runs this town." The other two deputies moved in, hands on their holsters, ready to draw if the soldiers behind me twitched. It was a Mexican standoff, but the locals were bringing pistols to a drone fight. The soldiers behind me shifted. I heard the distinct metallic click of a safety being disengaged. They were ready to drop the deputies where they stood. One word from me, or one nod from General Higgins, and this wedding would turn into a bloodbath. I had to stop it. Not for Conrad, but for the young deputies who were just following orders, however stupid those orders were. "Stand down," I ordered the soldiers. My voice was a whip crack. The soldiers froze. They did not lower their weapons, but they did not fire. The deputy, wrenching my arm, paused. He was confused. He had expected me to struggle to beg. He did not expect me to command a squad of special forces while being handcuffed. Sheriff Miller reached the top of the stairs. He was breathing hard. He looked at me, pinned by his deputy. He looked at Conrad, who was practically dancing with glee. "Book him," Conrad yelled. "Assault, trespassing, fraud. Throw the book at him." Sheriff Miller stepped closer. He was 3 feet away. He looked at my face. He looked at the sweat on my brow. Then his eyes dropped to my chest. The deputy's arm was blocking part of his view, but Miller leaned in. He saw the blue ribbon. He saw the gold star, and then he saw the name tag. Rhodes. The color drained from the sheriff's face so fast it looked like he had been shot. His mouth opened. His eyes went wide, pupils dilating in shock. He stopped moving. He stopped breathing. "Rhodes," the sheriff whispered. "Calvin Rhodes." He looked at me again, searching my face, peeling back the layers of age and wrinkles to find the image he had seen in textbooks, in training manuals, in the legends passed down in the barracks. The deputy holding me tightened his grip. "Boss, I got him. Do you want me to put him in the car?" The sheriff's reaction was instantaneous and violent. "Let him go," Miller roared. The deputy flinched. "What I said, get your hands off him," Miller shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Get your hands off him right now." The deputy released me, stumbling back as if he had touched a hot stove. I straightened up. I rolled my shoulder, feeling the joint pop back into place. I adjusted my tunic. I brushed the invisible dust from my sleeve. Sheriff Miller stood there trembling. He looked like a man who had just woken up to find a grenade in his bed. He knew what stolen valor was, but he also knew what the real thing looked like, and he knew the name Calvin Rhodes. Everyone in the military police knew the name. The ghost of a Shao Valley, the man who held a perimeter alone for 6 hours against a battalion. Conrad did not understand. He was blinded by his own narrative. "What are you doing?" "Miller," Conrad shrieked. "Why did you let him go? I told you to arrest him." Sheriff Miller did not answer Conrad. He did not even look at him. He was staring at me with a mixture of horror and reverence. Slowly, shakily, he brought his right hand up. His fingers were stiff. He placed them against the brim of his hat. He saluted. It was not the crisp salute of the general. It was the clumsy, terrified salute of a man realizing he had almost committed a mortal sin. The 3 deputies looked at their boss. They looked at each other. They saw the fear in his eyes. Instinct took over. They holstered their weapons. They straightened their spines. One by one, they raised their hands. 4 local police officers standing on a stage paid for by corruption, saluting the man they had just tried to handcuff. The silence on the lawn was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Conrad stared. His mouth hung open. He looked from the sheriff to me, his brain unable to process the data. "Stop it," Conrad whispered. "Stop it. He is a fraud. He is a nobody." Sheriff Miller lowered his hand. He turned to Conrad. The look on his face was terrifying. It was the look of a man who realizes he has been played for a fool and the stakes were his entire life. "You son of a bitch," Miller said. His voice was low, shaking with rage. Conrad stepped back. "Excuse me. You told me he was a vagrant," Miller said, stepping toward Conrad. "You told me he was a trespasser. You told me he was some crazy old man from the city." "He is," Conrad yelled. Miller pointed a finger at me. "That man is Sergeant Major Calvin Rhodes. Do you know who that is? Do you have any idea who you just ordered me to assault? I do not care who he is." Conrad spat. Miller grabbed Conrad by the lapel of his $3,000 suit. He yanked him close. The sheriff was no longer the obedient servant. He was a terrified man trying to save his soul. "That man is a national hero," Miller hissed. "We studied his tactics at the academy. He is the reason half the guys in my unit made it home alive in '91. And you tried to make me arrest him." Miller shoved Conrad away. Conrad stumbled, hitting the podium again. "You almost got me killed!" "Conrad," Miller shouted. "You almost got my men killed. Do you see those soldiers behind him? Do you think they would have let us put him in a car? They would have neutralized us in 3 seconds. You almost started a firefight at your daughter's wedding because you were too arrogant to check who you were messing with." Conrad straightened his jacket. He tried to regain his composure. He tried to summon the ghost of his authority. "I pay your salary, Miller," Conrad said icily. "If you do not arrest him, you are finished in this town. I will have your badge. I will have your pension." Miller laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You think I care about a pension?" Miller asked. He looked at the general, who was watching with crossed arms. He looked at the FBI agents moving through the crowd. "Look around, Conrad. It is over. My badge cannot save you, and your money cannot save you. You just declared war on the United States Marine Corps." Miller turned his back on Conrad. He looked at me. He took off his hat. He held it in his hands, twisting the brim. Sergeant Major Miller said softly, "I did not know. I swear to God I did not know." I looked at him. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the genuine terror. He was a man who had lost his way, a man who had eaten from the wrong table for too long. But in the end, when the truth stood in front of him, he recognized it. I looked at the deputy who had twisted my arm. He was looking at the ground, his face bright red. "Get your men off the stage, Sheriff," I said quietly. "This is now a federal operation." "Yes, sir," Miller said. "Immediately, sir." He signaled his deputies. "Let's go. Move out. Perimeter only. Let the feds handle it." The deputies scrambled down the stairs like children fleeing a haunted house. Miller lingered for 1 second. He looked at Conrad with pure hatred. "I hope you rot," Conrad, Miller said, "and do not call me for bail." He walked away. Conrad was alone. The wall of blue uniforms he thought he owned had dissolved. He stood center stage, isolated, stripped of his protection. He looked at the crowd. They were silent, judging. He looked at Tyson. Tyson was standing next to me, watching the sheriff leave. Conrad looked at me. There was no more arrogance in his eyes. Only the cold, sharp realization of a predator who has suddenly become the prey. But he was Conrad Montgomery. He did not know how to lose. He looked at the file I had thrown on the podium. The file about the armor plates. "You think this scares me?" Conrad whispered, picking up the file. "It is just paper. I have lawyers who eat paper for breakfast." I stepped closer. "It is not just paper, Conrad," I said. "It is a list of names, and the spirits of those names are standing right behind you." Conrad spun around, expecting to see ghosts. There was no one there, just the empty air. But he felt it. I saw him shiver. Then he looked past me. He saw the general walking up the stairs. The sheriff leaving was the turning of the tide, but the general arriving was the tsunami. Conrad dropped the file. His hands were shaking so bad he could not hold it. Who invited him?" Conrad stammered. "I did," I said, "and he does not like to be kept waiting." The file lay on the podium like a bomb waiting to detonate. Conrad stared at it. The cover was simple beige cardstock, but the red stamp across the front was vibrant and terrifying. Confidential. It was the kind of document that men like Conrad spent millions of dollars to bury in the basement of the Pentagon. But the truth has a way of crawling out of the dark, especially when a soldier carries it. I placed my hand on the file. I did not open it immediately. I wanted Conrad to feel the weight of what was coming. I wanted him to sweat. "You built your empire on strength, Conrad," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lawn. "You tell everyone that Montgomery Defense saves lives. You tell the investors that your ceramic plates are impenetrable. You tell the mothers of America that their sons are safe in your gear. I flipped the cover open. The pages rustled in the wind. But this report tells a different story. I looked at the first page. It was a purchase order from 1991, Operation Desert Storm. I began to read. I did not shout. I read with the cold, monotonous precision of a judge delivering a death sentence. Purchase order 704, 5,000 units of ceramic body armor. Batch number Alpha. Manufacturing cost reduced by 40% by substituting industrial-grade ceramic with composite filler. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The veterans in the audience knew exactly what that meant. It meant the difference between a bruise and a casket. Conrad lunged forward. "Stop reading that. It is proprietary information. You are violating corporate espionage laws." I ignored him. I turned the page. Field report. Incident at Grid 4-4. 3 casualties. Incoming fire from small arms. Rounds penetrated front plates. Fatalities confirmed. I looked up at Conrad. He was pale. He was shaking his head, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. "I am going to read their names." "Conrad," I said, "because you cashed the check for their armor, but you never paid for their funerals." "Private First Class. Michael Torres," I said. He was 19. He had a baby daughter waiting in Ohio. Corporal David King, the first, continued. He was 22. He wrote poetry. Sergeant Luis Ramirez. He was my radio operator. He died in my arms because your plate shattered like a dinner plate when a single round hit his chest. Conrad screamed. "Shut up. It was war. Things break in war. It is not my fault. It was your fault," I roared back. "The investigation proved the materials were substandard. You knew. The internal memos are right here. You signed off on the cheaper materials to increase your profit margin by $3 million. I held up a piece of paper with Conrad's signature at the bottom. The ink was black and bold. It was the signature of a man signing a death warrant for profit. $3 million, I said to the crowd. That is the price of 3 lives. $1 million a soul. Is that a good return on investment, Conrad? The guests were horrified. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Conrad with pure revulsion. The illusion of the benevolent billionaire was gone. In its place stood a war criminal in a tuxedo. But I was not done. The armor was just the beginning. The armor was the blood on his hands from the past. I needed to show them the dirt on his hands right now. I closed the file on the armor. I looked around the beautiful estate. I looked at the rolling green lawns, the flower beds, the weeping willow trees. It looked like paradise. But paradise is often built on hell. You like to build things, Conrad, I said, gesturing to the mansion behind us. You are a developer. You take empty land and you turn it into gold. I looked at the ground beneath my feet. I tapped the toe of my shoe against the wooden stage. But this land was not empty, was it? Conrad's eyes widened. He knew where I was going. This was the secret he had kept even from his own family. Don't, Conrad whispered. Please, not that. I looked at Vanessa. She was standing next to Tyson, looking confused and frightened. She loved this house. She had told everyone it was her dream home. Vanessa, I said gently, do you know why your father got this land so cheap? Do you know why no one else wanted to build here? Vanessa shook her head. No, she whispered. Daddy said it was a historical preservation deal. I nodded. It was historical, all right. I pulled a second document from my pocket. It was an old survey map, yellow with age. This land used to be the Pleasant Hill Cemetery, I said. It was the final resting place for the African American veterans of the First World War. Men who fought for this country when this country would not even let them drink from the same water fountain. I held up the map. There were 400 graves here, Vanessa. 400 soldiers. I pointed to the spot where the wedding altar stood, right where you are standing, right where you said your vows. That is where the unknown soldiers were buried. Vanessa let out a sharp cry. She looked down at her feet as if the ground had suddenly turned to lava. She stepped back, tripping on her long white train. Conrad bulldozed it. I said, my voice hard as stone. He did not move the bodies. He did not call the families. He simply hired a crew at night, paid them in cash, and told them to flatten the earth. He poured concrete over the bones of heroes to build a swimming pool. The crowd was silent. But this was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of horror. It was a primal spiritual recoil. The guests looked at the ground. They looked at the champagne glasses in their hands. They realized they were standing on holy ground that had been desecrated. "You are lying," Conrad screamed. "We moved them. We moved them to the county plot." I looked at him. "Show me the permits, Conrad. Show me the transfer records. There are none, because you did not move them. You crushed them. You built your daughter's happiness on top of a mass grave." I looked at Tyson. He was staring at the floor, his face gray. He looked like he was about to be sick. "This is the legacy he is giving you, son," I said. "Blood money and desecrated graves. Is this the foundation you want to build your marriage on?" Tyson shook his head. "No," he whispered. "Oh, God, no." I turned my eyes to Vanessa. She was the princess of this kingdom. She had been shielded from the ugly truth her entire life, but the shield was shattered. Vanessa looked at her father. She looked at the man who had bought her ponies and cars and dresses. She saw him clearly for the first time. She saw the sweat. She saw the lies. She saw the monster. "Daddy," Vanessa said, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Tell him it is not true. Tell me we are not standing on people." Conrad reached out to her. His hands were shaking. "Honey, listen to me. It is complicated. It was a business decision. The land was sitting there. It was a waste. Those people, they were dead a long time ago. No one cared about them. No one cared," I interrupted. "I cared. Their families cared. God cared." Vanessa backed away. She looked at her father's outstretched hand as if it were covered in blood. "Don't touch me!" she screamed. Conrad froze. He looked heartbroken. This was the only thing he truly loved in his own twisted way. His daughter. "Vanessa, please," Conrad begged. "I did it for you. I wanted you to have the best view. I wanted you to have the biggest estate. You put me in a graveyard," Vanessa cried. She grabbed the skirt of her wedding dress and ripped it. She tore the silk as if trying to separate herself from the corruption. "I am wearing a dress bought with blood money. I am living in a house of bones," she turned to Tyson. "Did you know?" she asked him. "Did you know about this?" Tyson shook his head violently. "I swear, Vanessa, I didn't know. He told me it was orchard land." Vanessa looked at me. She looked at the metal on my chest. She realized that the poor security guard she had ignored in the limousine was the only person telling the truth. "I am sorry," she whispered to me. "I am so sorry." She took off the diamond earrings her father had given her. She threw them on the ground. She took off the necklace. She threw it at Conrad's feet. "I do not want it," she screamed at her father. "I do not want any of it." Conrad fell to his knees. He tried to gather the jewelry. He tried to salvage the symbols of his love. "Vanessa, don't be stupid," Conrad cried. "These are worth thousands. Don't throw them away." It was a pathetic sight. A billionaire on his knees scrambling for diamonds in the grass while his daughter looked at him with absolute loathing. I stood over him. "You can pick up the diamonds, Conrad," I said. "But you cannot pick up your dignity. That is gone forever." I looked at the general. He gave a subtle nod. The time for talking was over. The time for justice had arrived. The evidence was laid out. The moral crime was exposed. Now it was time for the law to finish what I had started. The helicopter blades were finally slowing down. The deafening roar faded into a high-pitched whine that sounded like a warning siren. The dust on the lawn began to settle, coating the expensive white tablecloths and the floral arrangements in a layer of gray grit. Conrad Montgomery stood by the podium. He looked small. Minutes ago, he had been the master of his universe, commanding sheriffs and silencing critics. Now he was just a man in a dusty suit watching a god descend from the machine. The side door of the Black Hawk was fully open. A metal step extended, and then General Mad Dog Higgins stepped onto the grass. He was a mountain of a man. Even at 65 years old, he carried himself with the density of a tank. He was wearing his Class A uniform, the dark green fabric stretched tight across broad shoulders that had borne the weight of command for 2 decades. But it was not his size that made the air leave the lungs of the 300 guests. It was the stars. 4 silver stars on each shoulder caught the sunlight flashing like lightning. A 4-star general. There are only a handful of them on the planet. They do not attend weddings. They do not make social calls. When a 4-star general lands on your lawn, it means the ground you are standing on has just become a battlefield. Higgins adjusted his beret. He surveyed the scene with eyes that looked like cold steel. He looked at the terrified guests. He looked at the trembling Conrad. He looked at the sheriff who was fleeing the scene. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply assessed the threat level, categorized the targets, and began to move. He walked toward the stage. His stride was long and purposeful. He did not walk around the flower beds. He walked through them, crushing the imported lilies under his combat boots without breaking his rhythm. 2 military police officers flanked him, their hands resting on their sidearms, scanning the crowd for anyone foolish enough to make a sudden movement. Conrad watched him come. I saw the gears turning in Conrad's panic-stricken mind. He was a narcissist, and narcissists always believe they are the most important person in the room. He convinced himself that this was a misunderstanding. He convinced himself that he could charm the general just like he charmed the zoning board. Conrad straightened his tie. He wiped the sweat from his upper lip. He forced a smile onto his face. It was a ghastly plastic expression that did not reach his eyes. He stepped down from the stage to meet the general on the grass. He wanted to intercept him before he reached me. He wanted to control the interaction. General Conrad called out, his voice pitched too high. "What an unexpected honor. I assume you are here for the fundraiser. We were just discussing the Veteran Housing Initiative." Conrad extended his hand. It was the handshake of a salesman, eager and desperate. I watched from the stage. I did not move. I did not speak. I knew Higgins. I knew that he hated 2 things in this world: liars and people who wasted his time. Conrad was both. Higgins did not slow down. He did not look at Conrad's extended hand. He did not even look at Conrad's face. He looked through him as if Conrad were nothing more than a ghost or a shadow on the grass. The general's shoulder brushed against Conrad's arm as he walked past. It was not a violent shove, but the force of it spun Conrad around. Conrad stumbled, struggling to keep his balance on the uneven turf. He looked shocked. He had offered his hand to senators and presidents, and they had always taken it. He could not comprehend being treated like invisible debris. General Conrad stammered, chasing after him. "I am speaking to you. I am Conrad Montgomery. This is my estate." Higgins stopped. He turned his head slowly. He looked at Conrad with an expression of mild annoyance, like one looks at a buzzing fly. "I know who you are, Mr. Montgomery," Higgins said. His voice was deep, a bass rumble that vibrated in the chest. "You are the civilian who is currently obstructing a federal investigation. If you speak to me one more time before I address my superior, I will have you gagged and zip-tied to that fence." Conrad froze. His mouth snapped shut. Higgins turned his back on him. He continued his march toward the stage. Toward me. I stood at attention. My bad leg was screaming, but I locked my knee. I pulled my shoulders back. I was no longer a security guard. I was a sergeant major, and I was greeting a brother. Higgins walked up the stairs. The wood groaned under his weight. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. He looked at my face. He looked at the gray hair, the lines around my eyes, the weariness that I tried to hide. Then his eyes dropped to the Medal of Honor around my neck. He softened. The steel in his eyes melted into something warm and wet. Sergeant Major Higgins said softly. "General," I replied. He shook his head. "Don't call me that, Calvin. Not you. To you, I am just the kid you dragged out of the fire." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. It was not a polite, diplomatic hug. It was a bear hug. It smelled of starch and old tobacco and brotherhood. He squeezed me hard enough to crack a rib, and for the first time that day I felt the tension leave my body. I hugged him back. I patted the 4 stars on his shoulder. "You got fat, Mad Dog," I whispered in his ear. He laughed, a loud booming laugh that shook his chest against mine. "And you got old, boss," he whispered back. "But you still clean up nice. That uniform still fits." He pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders. He looked me up and down, checking for injuries, checking for the toll of the years. "I got your message," Higgins said, his voice serious again. "I pulled the files you asked for, but I did not think it was this bad. I did not think he had his claws this deep into your family." He looked at Tyson. Tyson was standing a few feet away, watching us with wide eyes. He had never seen a general hug anyone. He had certainly never seen a general hug his father, the night watchman. Tyson looked at the stars on Higgins' uniform, then at the medal on my chest. The math was finally adding up in his head. The hierarchy of the world he thought he understood was crumbling. In the real world, money was power. But in this world, the world of blood and sacrifice, his father outranked the billionaire. "Is this the boy?" Higgins asked, nodding at Tyson. "Yes," I said. This is Tyson. Higgins stepped toward Tyson. Tyson instinctively straightened up. He looked terrified. Sir Tyson squeaked. Higgins looked him over. He looked at the tuxedo. He looked at the fear. Your father talks about you, Higgins said. Even back in the desert. He used to show me your picture. You were 3 years old. He kept it inside his helmet. He said he had to make it home because he had to teach you how to be a man. Tyson swallowed hard. He looked at me. Tears filled his eyes again. I am sorry, Sir Tyson whispered. I didn't know. Higgins frowned. He did not accept the apology. Ignorance is not an excuse, son, Higgins said sternly. It is a choice. You chose not to see who your father was because it was easier to look at the shiny things that man over there offered you. Higgins pointed a thumb over his shoulder at Conrad, who was standing on the grass watching us with a mixture of hatred and fear. But today you get a second chance, Higgins continued. Do not waste it, because men like your father are rare, and they do not live forever. Higgins turned back to me. All right, boss, sentimentality is over. We have work to do. He walked to the microphone, the same microphone Conrad had used to spew his lies. Higgins adjusted the stand. He was taller than Conrad, so he had to pull it up. He looked out at the crowd. 300 of the wealthiest, most influential people in the state were staring back at him. They were silent. They were waiting for judgment. Higgins leaned into the mic. My name is General Marcus Higgins, United States Army. His voice boomed across the estate, reaching the parking lot, reaching the neighbors, reaching the sky. Effective immediately, this estate is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A gasp went through the crowd. A few people stood up, grabbing their purses and phones, thinking they could slip away. Sit down, Higgins barked. The command was like a physical blow. The people sat back down instantly. No one leaves, Higgins said. The gates are sealed. Your identification will be checked. Your vehicles will be searched. If you are found to be in possession of any documents related to Montgomery Defense Corp., or if you attempt to conceal evidence, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice and treason. Treason. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Treason was not a white-collar crime. Treason was a capital offense. Conrad ran to the front of the stage. You can't do this, Conrad screamed. This is a wedding. These are civilians. You can't hold them hostage. I have rights. Higgins looked down at Conrad. He smiled. It was a terrifying smile. You lost your rights when you sold defective armor to my troops, Conrad Higgins said calmly. You lost your rights when you bribed federal inspectors. And you certainly lost your rights when you desecrated a military cemetery to build this tacky swimming pool. Higgins pointed to the FBI agents, who were now moving through the crowd collecting phones and securing the perimeter. We are not just here for the fraud, Conrad. We are here for the bodies. We have a ground-penetrating radar team arriving in 10 minutes. We are going to tear up this lawn. We are going to tear up that patio. And we are going to find every single soldier you tried to erase. Conrad's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the grass. He looked at the pristine green turf that he had manicured so obsessively. He knew what was beneath it. He knew what they would find. Vanessa started to cry. She covered her face with her hands. She knew her life as a princess was over. Higgins turned to me. I assume you have the recording, Sergeant Major. I tapped my chest pocket. Right here, General, good, Higgins said. Then let's finish this. He signaled to the lead FBI agent. The agent, a woman in a sharp blue windbreaker, nodded and walked toward Conrad. She was holding a pair of handcuffs, but these were not the sheriff's handcuffs. These were federal steel. Conrad looked up. He looked at the agent. He looked at the general. And then for one last desperate second, he looked at Tyson. Tyson, help me, Conrad begged. Do something. Call the firm. Call someone. Tyson stood next to me. He looked down at the man who had bought him. He looked at the man who had called his father a piece of trash. Tyson took a deep breath. He took a step closer to the edge of the stage. I can't help you, Conrad, Tyson said. His voice was steady for the first time all day. Why not? Conrad screamed. I made you. I gave you everything. No, Tyson said. You gave me a price tag. My father. He gave me a name, and I am done selling it. Tyson turned his back on Conrad. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me. General Higgins nodded. That is better, he muttered. The FBI agent reached Conrad. She pulled his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of the world snapping back into alignment. It was the sound of gravity returning to a planet that had been upside down for too long. "Get him out of here," Higgins ordered. As they dragged Conrad away, kicking and screaming about his lawyers, I looked at the crowd. They were watching the fall of their king, and in their eyes I saw fear. They knew that if Conrad could fall, any of them could fall. They looked at me, the old security guard, with a new understanding. They realized that you can ignore a man because he is poor, but you ignore a soldier at your own peril. "We have cleared the airspace," Higgins said to me quietly. "Do you want to ride home, Calvin? Or do you want to stay and watch them dig?" I looked at the lawn. I thought about the men buried there. I thought about the respect they had been denied for so long. "I will stay," I said. "I have to stand watch until they are all accounted for." Higgins nodded. I expected nothing less. He turned to his men. "Get the sergeant major a chair," he ordered, "and get him a water. He is on duty." The soldiers moved instantly, and as I sat down in the center of the chaos with my son by my side and my general guarding my back, I finally let myself feel the pain in my leg. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. It was the pain of a mission accomplished. The handcuffs were tight around Conrad's wrists, but his mouth was still free and he was using it to fight for his life. He was not fighting with fists. He was fighting with the oldest weapon of the corrupt man: denial, absolute screaming denial. He twisted his body trying to face the crowd while the FBI agent held him firmly in place. He looked at the senator in the third row. He looked at the bankers and the judges. He was pleading with them to reject the reality unfolding before their eyes. "It is a forgery," Conrad shouted. His voice was raw, scratching against his throat. "Do not believe them. These documents are fake. Anyone can print a piece of paper. Anyone can type up a report." He looked at me with eyes that burned with a mixture of hatred and panic. "You think you are clever, Calvin? You think you can frame me with some typed-up nonsense from 30 years ago? My lawyers will tear this apart in court. This is hearsay. This is a fabrication. There is no proof. There is no witness." He was right about one thing. In a court of law, paper can be debated. Signatures can be questioned. Memories can be challenged. Conrad knew how to manipulate the legal system. He had done it for decades. He knew that if he could create just enough doubt, just a sliver of uncertainty, he could drag this out for years. He could bury the truth in motions and appeals until everyone forgot about the bodies under the swimming pool. I watched him spin his web. I watched the crowd. Some of them were nodding slowly. They wanted to believe him. They wanted to believe that their friend, their host, was not a monster. It is hard to accept that you have been drinking champagne with a murderer. Denial is a comfortable blanket, and Conrad was trying to wrap them all in it. "Where is the proof?" Conrad yelled again, sensing the hesitation in the audience. "Show me the proof. Show me a witness who heard me say these things. You have nothing." I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the small black receiver unit I had soldered together in the warehouse. It was not much to look at, just a plastic box with a speaker and a volume dial, but inside it was the echo of a soul. I walked over to the podium. I moved the file folder aside. I placed the black box directly in front of the microphone. Conrad stopped shouting. He looked at the box. He looked at me. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed his face. He did not know what it was. He had been so focused on his own voice that he had forgotten that other people could listen. "You want a witness, Conrad?" I asked. Conrad sneered. "You don't have a witness. Everyone involved in that deal is dead or paid off." I nodded. "You are right. The men you killed are dead, and the men you bribed are silent. But there is one witness you forgot about." I turned the volume dial on the black box all the way to the right. A high-pitched squeal of feedback cut through the air, making the guests cover their ears. I adjusted the frequency. The squeal settled into a low, steady hiss of static. It sounded like rain on a tin roof. "You forgot about yourself, Conrad," I said. I pressed the play button. The static cleared instantly. A voice boomed out of the speakers. It was loud. It was clear. It was arrogant. It was unmistakably the voice of Conrad Montgomery. The recording was from the night before, captured by the bug I had planted in the lining of Tyson's jacket. The voice of Conrad filled the garden. "Stop crying, Tyson. You are embarrassing yourself." It was a cheap piece of junk. Conrad went rigid. He stopped struggling against the FBI agent. He stood frozen, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax figure. The recording continued. Do you want to trade $80 million for a rusty watch from a senile old security guard? The crowd was dead silent. This was not a document. This was not a rumor. This was the man himself speaking in the privacy of his own suite, revealing the darkness of his heart. But I was not done. I fast-forwarded the tape. I needed to get to the confession. I needed the world to hear the crime. I pressed play again. Conrad's voice. The inspector from the Pentagon is asking too many questions about the ceramic density. He says the plates are cracking in the stress tests. A second voice, slick and nervous, answered. It was one of Conrad's lawyers. What do we do, sir? If we delay the shipment, we lose the contract. Conrad's voice laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Pay him off. Give him 50 grand in a Cayman account and ship the plates, lawyer's voice. But sir, if the plates fail in the field, the soldiers. Conrad's voice. They are soldiers. They are paid to die. It is a numbers game. Ship the product. I am not losing a $40 million contract over a few dead grunts. The gasp from the crowd was a physical wave. It was a sound of collective horror. I saw General Higgins close his eyes and clench his jaw. He had suspected it, but hearing it out loud was a knife in the heart of every man who had ever worn a uniform. Conrad is a monster. That was the thought running through 300 minds at that exact second. Conrad tried to speak. He tried to shout over the recording. Turn it off. It is AI. It is a deep fake. Turn it off. But no one moved. The FBI agent held him tighter, forcing him to listen to his own damnation. I looked at Tyson. He was standing next to me, staring at the black box. He looked like a man watching his house burn down with him inside it. He was shaking. He was remembering the conversation. He was realizing that his father-in-law was not just a tough businessman, but a sociopath. But there was one more thing Tyson needed to hear. The final nail in the coffin of his illusion. I fast-forwarded one last time. I looked at my son. I am sorry, Tyson, I whispered, but you need to know the whole truth. I pressed play. Conrad's voice. The wedding is going to cost a fortune, but it is a good investment. Tyson is the perfect face for the new veteran housing project. He is young, he is handsome, and he is malleable. Vanessa's voice shrill and complaining. But Daddy, he is so boring, and his family is so low class. Do I really have to marry him? Conrad's voice. Yes, you do. We need his minority status to get the government grant for the land. The city won't give the permit to a rich white developer, but they will give it to a struggling black architect with a sad backstory. Vanessa's voice. So he is just a prop. Conrad's voice. He is a tool, sweetheart. He is a useful idiot. He has no spine. I bought him with a watch and a suit. He will sign whatever I put in front of him. He is a gold digger just like the rest of them. But he is our gold digger. The recording ended with the sound of Conrad and Vanessa laughing. I clicked the stop button. The silence that followed was heavier than the helicopter. It was a silence that crushed the soul. I looked at Tyson. He was not shaking anymore. He was still, perfectly still. He looked at Vanessa. She was standing 10 feet away, her face buried in her hands, weeping. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of shame. She had been exposed. Tyson looked at Conrad. Conrad was not shouting anymore. He was looking at the ground, defeated. The recording had stripped him naked. There was no defense against his own voice calling his son-in-law a useful idiot. Tyson took a step forward. He walked toward the edge of the stage. He looked down at the gold watch he had thrown on the floor earlier. He looked at it for a long time. Then he kicked it. He kicked it with all the strength in his body. The watch skittered across the stage, flew off the edge, and landed in the dirt near the general's boots. Tyson turned to me. His eyes were red. His face was wet, but his voice was clear. He called me a tool, Tyson whispered. I nodded. He did. He called me a gold digger. I nodded again. Tyson let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I loved her. Dad, Tyson said, his voice breaking. I actually loved her. I thought they respected me. I thought I was part of the family. You are part of a family, Tyson, I said firmly. You are a Rhodes, and we do not let people use us. Tyson looked at his hands. He looked at the wedding ring on his finger. It was platinum. It was heavy. He pulled it off. He threw it into the grass. He looked at Conrad. "I am not your tool," Tyson said. His voice started low but grew louder. "I am not your prop, and I am not your idiot." Conrad looked up. For the first time, he looked at Tyson with fear. Not because Tyson was dangerous physically, but because Tyson was the signatory on all the fraud documents. Tyson held the keys to the kingdom Conrad had built on lies. "Tyson, wait," Conrad pleaded. "We can talk about this." It was just talk. It was locker room talk. Tyson walked over to the FBI agent who was holding Conrad. "Officer," Tyson said. The agent looked at him. "Yes, sir." Tyson pointed at the mansion. "In the study in the wall safe behind the painting of the horse. That is where he keeps the second set of books, the ones that show the bribes. The combination is 4820. Conrad screamed. "No!" Tyson shut up. Tyson leaned in close to Conrad's face. 4820, Tyson repeated. "That is the date I met your daughter. You made me use it as the code because you said it was the day your luck changed." Tyson smiled. It was a sad, broken smile. "Well, Conrad, your luck just ran out." Tyson turned around and walked back to me. He stood next to me. He looked at the general. He looked at the crowd. "I am ready to go," Dad, Tyson said. "I don't want to be here anymore." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We are almost done, son. Just one more thing." I looked at the general. The general nodded. He signaled to the agents. "Take him away." The lead FBI agent did not shout. He did not need to. He held up a piece of paper that carried the seal of the Department of Justice, and that seal screamed louder than any megaphone. He walked toward Conrad with the slow, inevitable momentum of a glacier. Conrad was still standing near the edge of the stage, his chest heaving, his eyes darting from the general to the exit gates looking for a hole in the net. But there were no holes. The perimeter was sealed with black SUVs and men who did not care about his bank account. "Conrad Montgomery," the agent said, his voice flat and professional. "You are under arrest for high treason conspiracy to defraud the United States government and the violation of the National Graves Protection Act." Conrad took a step back, bumping into the podium. He shook his head violently, sweat flying from his hair. "No," Conrad gasped. "You cannot arrest me. I am a patriot. I employ thousands of people. I have dinner with the governor. You are making a mistake." The agent did not argue. He simply stepped onto the stage. He reached for his belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent ordered. Conrad looked at the handcuffs. They were standard issue. They were dull gray metal. They were not gold. They were not diamond encrusted. They were the only honest things Conrad had seen all day. "I will not!" Conrad screamed. He suddenly lunged to the left, trying to jump off the stage and run toward the crowd. It was a foolish, desperate move. He was a 65-year-old man in a tuxedo trying to outrun federal agents in their prime. He didn't make it 3 steps. 2 agents tackled him. They hit him high and low, taking him down with a bone-jarring thud. Conrad hit the wooden floor of the stage face first. A groan of pain and humiliation escaped his lips. The agents pressed him into the wood, one knee on his back, one hand controlling his head. "Get off me," Conrad shrieked, his voice muffled by the floorboards. "Do you know who I am? I will sue you. I will ruin you. You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent said, grabbing Conrad's right wrist and wrenching it behind his back. "I will not be silent," Conrad yelled, kicking his legs like a petulant child. "Tyson, call the firm. Get the legal team on the phone. Tell them to bring the money. All of it." The agent grabbed the other wrist. The sound of the ratcheting cuffs echoed through the microphone that had fallen nearby. Click, click, click. It was a sound of finality. It was the sound of a steel door slamming shut on a lifetime of privilege. The agent hauled Conrad to his feet. Conrad's expensive suit was covered in dust. His nose was bleeding. His comb-over had fallen apart, revealing the bald scalp he tried so hard to hide. He looked pathetic. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a criminal caught in the act. The crowd watched in stunned silence. They held up their phones, recording every second. The man who had preened and posed for their admiration was now being dragged like a sack of garbage. I looked at the general. He was standing with his arms crossed, watching the arrest with a grim satisfaction. He nodded at me. "Clean sweep," Sergeant Major Higgins said softly. But the war was not quite over. There was one last casualty to deal with. Vanessa. She had stopped crying. Now she was in a state of frantic panic. She saw her father being dragged away. She saw the FBI agent seizing the laptops from the DJ booth. She saw her dream wedding turning into a crime scene. She realized that her protection, her status, and her future were being put in the back of a federal vehicle. She ran to Tyson. She grabbed his arm with both hands. Her nails dug into his tuxedo jacket. Her face was a mask of running mascara and desperation. "Tyson, do something," she begged, shaking him. "They are taking Daddy. You have to stop them. You are the son-in-law. You are a partner. Tell them it is a mistake." Tyson stood rigid. He looked down at her hands, clutching his sleeve. These were the same hands that had thrown the necklace at her father minutes ago. But now that the reality of poverty was staring her in the face, she was trying to cling to the only man left standing. "Tyson." "Please," she cried, her voice rising to a shriek. "You love me. Remember, you promised to take care of me. If they take him, we lose the house. We lose the money. We lose everything." Tyson looked at her. He looked at her beautiful face, which was now twisted with greed and fear. He realized that she was not worried about her father's freedom. She was worried about her own comfort. She was not crying for the man. She was crying for the ATM. "We?" Tyson asked. His voice was quiet. "Yes, us," Vanessa pleaded. "We are a team. We are the Montgomerys." Tyson gently peeled her fingers off his arm, one by one. He did it with the same care he would use to remove a leech. "I am not a Montgomery," Vanessa, Tyson said. Vanessa froze. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Tyson stepped back. He created a distance between them that was wider than the ocean. "I am a Rhodes," Tyson said, "and we do not build our lives on graves." Vanessa stared at him. Her eyes went wide. She realized she had lost him. She realized that the tool, the prop, the useful idiot had woken up. "You can't leave me," she hissed, her voice turning venomous. "You are nothing without us. You are just a broke architect with a loser father." Tyson smiled. It was a genuine smile. It was the smile of a man who finally knows who he is. "I would rather be broke and free than rich and owned," Tyson said. He turned away from her. He looked at Conrad, who was being shoved into the back of a black SUV near the gate. The agents had paused to secure the prisoner. Conrad was looking back at us, his face pressed against the window, shouting words we couldn't hear. Tyson looked at his wrist. The Patek Philippe watch was still there. I had been wrong earlier. He hadn't thrown it yet. He had kicked the box, but the watch itself, the heavy golden shackle, was still clasped around his arm. It glittered in the sun. $50,000 of Swiss engineering. $50,000 of silence. Tyson raised his arm. He looked at the watch. He looked at the diamonds circling the face. He looked at the brand name that Conrad worshipped like a god. He reached for the clasp. Everyone watched him. Vanessa stopped screaming. The general watched. I watched. Tyson undid the latch. The watch came loose. He held it in his hand. It was heavy. It was the weight of every lie he had told himself for the past 5 years. He walked to the edge of the stage. Agent Tyson called out. The FBI agent who had arrested Conrad looked up. Tyson held the watch up high. "This belongs to the prisoner," Tyson shouted. He did not hand it over gently. He threw it. He threw it with all the anger and the pain and the relief of a man breaking out of prison. The watch sailed through the air. It spun in the sunlight, a golden arc of rejection. It landed on the hood of the black SUV with a loud metallic clang. Then it slid off and fell into the dirt right next to Conrad's feet as the agents tried to push him inside. "Add it to the evidence locker," Tyson said. "It is the payment for my soul, and I am returning it." Conrad looked down at the watch in the dirt. He tried to lunge for it, even in handcuffs. He tried to save his precious gold. The agents shoved him into the car and slammed the door. The engine roared. The SUV sped away, kicking up dust, leaving the watch lying in the mud. Tyson did not look back. He turned around. He looked at me. He was crying, but he was standing tall. He walked toward me. He did not limp. He did not hesitate. He walked with the stride of a Rhodes. He stopped in front of me. He looked at my uniform. He looked at the Medal of Honor. "Dad," he said. I looked at him. I saw my son. Not the architect, not the husband, just my son. "I am ready to go home," he said. I nodded. "Let's go," I said. I put my arm around his shoulder. He put his arm around my waist. We turned our backs on the mansion. We turned our backs on the weeping bride and the stunned guests. We walked down the stairs of the stage together. The general fell in step behind us. The soldiers formed a phalanx around us. We walked across the lawn, crushing the grass that hid the secrets of the dead. We walked toward the gate, toward my rusted sedan, toward a life that was poor in money but rich in truth. As we passed the rows of guests, something happened. The senator in the third row, the one who had stood up first, began to clap. It was a slow, solitary clap. Then the admiral joined in, then the sheriff, and then the whole world seemed to erupt. The applause rose like a wave. It was not polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation. They were cheering, not for the billionaire, not for the wedding. They were cheering for the father and the son who had walked into the lion's den and walked out with their honor intact. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes on the horizon. I just held my son tighter. "We are going fishing tomorrow," I whispered to him. Tyson laughed through his tears. "Yes, Dad," he said. "We are going fishing." The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of purple and burnt orange. It was the kind of evening that usually signaled the end of a long shift at the warehouse, a time when my back would ache and my feet would throb. But tonight, I felt no pain. I felt a strange, hollow lightness, the kind that comes after a fever breaks. The sirens had faded hours ago. The black SUVs had departed, taking Conrad and his empire of lies with them. The guests had scattered like leaves in the wind, racing home to scrub the association from their social media profiles. I sat on a wooden bench near the water's edge. My dress uniform was unbuttoned at the collar. My white cover sat on the bench beside me. Next to it sat my son Tyson. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers and white shirt, but the jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. His feet were bare in the grass. He looked younger than he had in years. He looked like the boy who used to run through the sprinklers in our backyard before he learned to worry about what the neighbors thought. We sat in silence for a long time. It was not the uncomfortable silence of the morning. It was a cleansing silence. We watched a heron glide across the surface of the lake, hunting for its dinner. "Dad," Tyson said. His voice was rough, scratched by the tears he had shed. I didn't turn to look at him. I kept my eyes on the heron. "Yeah, son," I answered. "I was afraid," Tyson whispered. I nodded. "I know." "No," Tyson said, turning to face me. "You don't know. I wasn't afraid of Conrad. I wasn't afraid of you. I was afraid of being nobody." He picked up a stone and threw it into the water. The splash was small, but the ripples spread wide. "I grew up watching you, Dad. I saw you counting coupons at the kitchen table. I saw you taping your work boots because we couldn't afford new ones. I saw how people looked at you in the grocery store, like you were invisible, like you didn't matter." Tyson took a deep breath. A shudder ran through his shoulders. "I promised myself I would never be invisible," he said. "I promised myself I would force the world to see me. And when Conrad came along, he saw me. Or at least I thought he did. He made me feel like I had finally arrived, like I had escaped the coupon clipping and the taped boots." I listened. I did not interrupt. A soldier knows that when a wound is being cleaned, you do not tell the patient to be quiet. You let the infection drain. He offered me a seat at the table, Tyson continued. And all I had to do was change my clothes, change my watch, change my last name. It seemed like a fair trade. I thought dignity was something you could buy once you had enough money. He looked at me. His eyes were dark with shame. I didn't realize that dignity is what you have when you have nothing else left. I reached out and put my hand on his knee. "You are right, Tyson," I said gently. "Poverty is hard. I never wanted you to struggle like I did. I worked double shifts so you could go to architecture school because I wanted you to build a life I couldn't give you. But I wanted you to build it on rock, not on sand." Tyson looked at his bare feet. "I built it on a graveyard," he whispered. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry I let him disrespect you. I am so sorry I let him break Mom's watch." "It is just a watch, Tyson," I said. "It can be fixed, or it can be replaced. But a soul, that is a one-time issue. And you saved yours today." Tyson looked up. "You really think so?" I smiled. "You threw the gold-back sun. You chose the hard road. That is what a Rhodes does." Tyson managed a weak smile. "So what do we do now? I am unemployed. I am divorced. I am probably going to be subpoenaed as a witness in a massive federal trial. And I am currently homeless because I am definitely not going back to that mansion." I chuckled. It felt good to laugh. "Well," I said, "my couch is lumpy, but it is free. And I make a pretty good pot of chili." Tyson laughed. A real genuine laugh. "I missed your chili." We sat there for a moment, letting the humor wash away the last of the tension. Then Tyson's face grew serious again. He looked at the horizon where the outline of the city was beginning to twinkle in the twilight. "I am an architect, Dad," he said thoughtfully. "I know how to design buildings. I know the codes. I know the suppliers." I nodded. "You are the best I know." Conrad's project, Tyson said, his mind starting to work. The veteran housing project. The one he was using as a front for money laundering. "Yeah," I said. "The feds seized the land. But the need is still there," Tyson said. "The veterans are still sleeping in their cars. The families are still waiting." He turned to me. His eyes were bright. They were not the glassy eyes of a puppet anymore. They were the eyes of a visionary. "What if we built it?" Tyson asked. I looked at him. Yeah," Tyson said, his voice gaining speed. "You know the community. You know what the soldiers need. You have the trust of men like General Higgins. I have the skills. I know where Conrad cut corners. I know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively." Tyson stood up. He began to pace back and forth in the grass, his hands moving as he sketched invisible blueprints in the air. "We start a new firm," he said. "Rhodes and Son, no Rhodes and Father. We bid on the contract. We do it right. We use real materials. We preserve the cemetery instead of paving over it. We build a memorial garden in the center. We make it a place where dignity lives." I watched him. I saw the passion returning to his body. This was the boy I had raised. This was the man who wanted to build, not just own. "I don't have capital, Tyson," I reminded him. "I have a pension and a 2004 sedan." Tyson stopped pacing. He looked at me. "We have something better than capital, Dad. We have the general, and we have the truth. Do you think the city is going to deny a permit to the Medal of Honor recipient who just exposed the biggest corruption scandal in the state?" I smiled. He had a point. And Tyson added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know where Conrad hid the rest of the supply inventory. There is a warehouse full of high-grade steel that he stole from the Navy. If we tell the feds, maybe we can negotiate a finder's fee, or better yet, get them to donate the materials to the project." I stood up. I picked up my cover. I brushed the grass from my trousers. "Rhodes and Son," I said. "I like the sound of that. But I am the CEO. You are just the laborer until you prove you can show up on time." Tyson grinned. "Deal." We shook hands. It was a firm handshake. Man to man. Partner to partner. "Come on," I said. "Let's go home. The general is expecting a status report at 0800, and I don't want to explain why my business partner is sleeping on a park bench." We walked back to the car. The rusted sedan sat alone in the parking lot, surrounded by the empty spaces where the limousines had been. It wasn't a luxury car. It had a dent in the fender and the air conditioner didn't work. But as Tyson climbed into the passenger seat and I started the engine, it felt like a chariot. I drove us out of the estate. We passed the yellow police tape. We passed the news vans that were already swarming the gate. We passed the ruin of Conrad's ambition. And we drove onto the open road. I looked over at Tyson. He had leaned his head back against the seat and fallen asleep. He looked peaceful. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't running. He was just going home. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the metal. I thought about the men who had died to give me this moment. I thought about Miller. I thought about Torres. I thought about Ramirez. They never got to see their sons grow up. They never got to start a business. They gave everything so that I could have this simple drive on a Tuesday evening. I pulled the car over for a second. We were on a quiet stretch of road under a street lamp. I took the metal off my neck. I looked at it one last time. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was the heavy burden of history. I placed it gently back into its velvet case. I snapped the lid shut. I didn't need to wear it anymore. The world knew who I was, and more importantly, my son knew who I was. I put the case in the glove compartment right next to the map and the tire gauge. It would stay there, ready if needed, but resting. I looked at the camera. I looked at you. We spend our lives chasing titles. We want to be called boss. We want to be called rich. We want to be called important. But the only title that truly matters is the one you earn when no one is watching. Conrad Montgomery had every title in the world, and he ended up as inmate number 402. I had nothing but a uniform and a promise, and I ended up with my family. So the next time someone tells you that you are washed up, or that you don't fit in, or that your value is determined by the digits in your bank account, do me a favor. Reach into your pocket, find your own truth, and stand your ground. Because a soldier doesn't fight because he hates what is in front of him. He fights because he loves what is behind him. I am Calvin Rhodes, and this is my report. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories of truth, winning over greed. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought their money made them better than you? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay strong and keep your honor clean. This story teaches us that true wealth is never measured by the gold on your wrist, but by the weight of your character. Conrad Montgomery believed he could purchase the world, yet he ended up bankrupt in the only currency that truly matters, which is honor. We often feel small when standing against giants with deep pockets, but the truth is a stone capable of bringing down any Goliath. Never let anyone convince you that your dignity has a price tag. Walk with your head high, not because you are better than others, but because you know exactly who you are. If you believe that integrity is worth fighting for, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories where justice prevails. And tell me in the comments below, what is the one thing in your life that is absolutely not for sale? I read every single response. Stay strong and see you in the next video.